live, and the finalists are coming up for all you students. So just thank you for making the time to come out here. I know it's going to be an awesome time. Before I introduce the man over here, Dr. Frank Turek, I do want to go over a few announcements and just things that you need to do. First thing, there's going to be a Q&A session at the end of tonight's event. Dr. Turek is done talking. We have a question mic that I believe is going to be set up in this corner. So while he's talking, be thinking of questions. If you have any, write them down so you don't forget. And then at the end, we'll have a line you can line up and ask the questions. If you don't get the chance to ask your question, if we run out of time, that's okay. We have these little QR code survey cards that we're giving out as you walk out the door. And our mission is to show that faith and reason coexist. Just because you're a Christian and say you have faith doesn't mean you throw logic and science out the window. And so that's our job, that's our goal on this campus, is to help show that faith and reason can go together. And so one of the ways we do that is by bringing guests like Dr. Frank Turek to come and speak. We're super excited to have him. He has a long list of credentials, and I wrote them down so I wouldn't forget all of them. Dr. Frank Turek is an award-winning author of books such as Legislating Morality, Stealing from God, and I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, which we'll get to hear about tonight. He's the president of the Cross-Examined Ministries. He speaks all around the nation at different colleges and universities and churches. He's debated prominent atheists such as Christopher Hitchens and David.
How many of you are here now? How many don't respond to surveys? 3 out of 10 don't respond to surveys. Let's go back to September 29th, 2006. That's when Petty Officer Michael Mansour is a United States Navy SEAL operating in Ramadi, Iraq. Mansour is standing on a roof in Ramadi, and he's standing in front of a doorway to this roof. He has 2 Navy SEAL teammates lying in the sniper-prone position next to him. They've already taken AK-47 fire and a rocket-propelled grenade, but they're not exactly sure where the enemy is. There's a bit of a lull in the fighting. Insurgents have blocked off the streets in Ramadi, and there's someone on the loudspeaker in the town mosque yelling, "Kill the Americans!" As Mansour and his team are looking for the next attack, an insurgent from an unknown location throws a grenade up on the roof. It hits Mansour in the chest, and it falls to his feet. Due to the length of the throw, there's no opportunity to pick it up and throw it back. He has only a split second to make a decision. He can leap through the doorway behind him and save himself, but if he does, his 2 teammates lying on the roof at his feet will surely die. Mansour, I will go in their stead. I've never seen a United States president cry until April of 2008. That's when President George W. Bush invited Mansour's parents into the East Room of the White House to give them their son's Medal of Honor posthumously. The president couldn't even get through the citation without breaking down. Since then, Mansour's high school in Garden Grove, California, built a new stadium. They named it Michael A. Mansour Memorial Stadium. The golden trident insignia that the SEALs wear dominates the 50-yard line. January 2019, North Island, California, just outside of San Diego, the United States Navy commissioned the USS Michael Mansour, the newest guided missile destroyer in the fleet. This is Mansour's mother, Sally, being escorted onto the ship, named in honor of her fallen son. Now, why did they do this? Because Michael Mansour literally sacrificed himself to save his friends. There's no greater love than to sacrifice yourself to save your friends, said Jesus of Nazareth before he went to the cross. Michael Mansour sacrificed himself to save his friends. The question is, Would anyone sacrifice himself to save you? And the answer is, someone already has. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. But in today's culture, and particularly on the college campus, people don't think this story's true. After all, it was written down by religious people. We know religious people tend to embellish things. Also, it's got miracles in it, resurrections. Who here has seen anyone rise from the dead? Then why should we believe one took place 2,000 years ago? Well, I actually think it's quite easy to show that Christianity is true. You only need to answer 4 questions in the affirmative to show that it's true. In other words, if you investigate these 4 questions, I think you'll realize that the answer to these 4 questions is yes. And if the answer to these 4 questions is yes, then Christianity is true. What are the 4 questions? Here are the 4 questions. The internet. Have you guys heard of this? It's on our website, crossexamine.org, at 8 p.m. on Wednesday nights. We're also on radio every Saturday morning. Here it'd be 9 a.m., but I know if you're a college student, you don't get up until the crack of noon on Saturday. So that's okay. It's podcasted. It's called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, the podcast. And you can, if you listen to it, what we do is we present evidence for Christianity, and we cross-examine ideas against it. Now, why are these the 4 questions? Truth, God, miracles, and the New Testament. And this is going to serve as our outline here tonight. First question, does truth exist? Why is that important? Well, you hear people saying there's no truth, you got your truth, I got my truth, all truth is relative, right? Well, if there's no truth, obviously Christianity can't be true. Of course, if there's no truth, then atheism can't be true either, right? I mean, nothing could be true. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if there was no truth, would you be going to LSU? Would you be going to school at all? No, you go to school to learn truth, right? So we're going to deal with that question first. Second question, does God exist? Obviously, Christianity can't be true if there's no God, but I hope to show you tonight that there really is a theistic God. What's a theistic God? That's a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things, and whose every attribute is infinite. Now, we're going to look at 3 arguments for this being. These arguments are taught in the Bible, but you don't need the Bible to know them. In fact, we're not even going to reference the Bible or refer to the Bible for evidence in point 2. You can establish that God exists without any reference to any religious work. In fact, we're going to spend most of our time tonight on point 2. Third question, are miracles possible? Obviously, Christianity can't be true if miracles are not possible. But I hope to show you tonight that not only are miracles possible, but the greatest miracle in the Bible has already occurred, and even atheists are admitting the data for this miracle. We'll see that here tonight. Then we're going to get to the key question, is the New Testament true? The New Testament doesn't have a prayer if there's no truth, no God, or no miracles. But if truth exists, if God exists, if miracles are possible, then we can see if the data is good enough to let us know whether one event from the ancient world took place. What would that event be for a Christian? That Jesus rose from the dead. Because if Jesus rose from the dead, game over, Christianity's true. Of course, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, game over, it's false. You might as well sleep in on Sunday and do what you want the rest of the week, because if Jesus didn't rise, point 1, does truth exist? Are you guys ready to go? Yeah. All right. Now, as we pointed out last night, whenever you start talking about truth, you always have to start with Jack Nicholson, right? Because Tom Cruise had him on the witness stand, and he said to him, "Colonel, I want the truth." And Nicholson said, Tigers, the Gamecocks, and the Crimson Tide did better than that. That's not how he said it. Here's how he said it. Let's try it again. I want the truth. You can't handle the truth. Now that felt better, didn't it? Didn't that feel good? Didn't you always want to say that to a professor somewhere? You can't handle the truth. Well, there's a lot of people that can't handle the truth. They're saying, you got your truth, I got my truth, all truth is relative. Well, if you don't get anything outside of what we talk about here tonight, this next couple of minutes, I think is the most important thinking skill I've ever learned. And as I mentioned last night, I was 33 years old. I already had a master's degree, and I didn't know what I'm about to show you in the next 2 minutes, to show you what a dimwit I was. This is so critical. Why? Because this thinking skill will help you discover what is false, and half of what you need to know in order to live a successful life is to be able to determine what is false, to discover what is false, because if you can discover what is false, you can avoid that and concentrate on what is true. This thinking skill will help you discover what is false. And here's the thinking skill. I'll show it to you by giving you an example. As we talked about last night, if someone would ever come up to you and say, there is no truth, you should ask that person a question. What should the question be? Is that true? Is it true that there's no truth? Because if it's true that there's no truth, the claim there is no truth can't be true, but it claims to be true. Did I say that right? Can everybody see that this is a self-defeating statement? What's a self-defeating statement? A self-defeating statement doesn't meet its own standard. A self-defeating statement violates the claim on itself. So someone says there's no truth, you turn the claim on itself and you say, is that true? All right, let's do a few more. Suppose someone says there's no such thing as absolute truth. If you turn the claim on itself, what question are you going to ask him? Yeah, or is that an absolute truth? Well, you might want to say, you absolutely sure? Right? You see, this is an absolute truth claim right here that claims there are no absolute truth claims. Now, people don't always say it this way. Sometimes in today's culture, they'll say it this way. They'll say, there isn't the truth, only my truth. You know, you've got your truth, I've got my truth, there is no the truth, you live your truth, I live my truth, we'll all get along, right? It sounds so Oprah, doesn't it? It sounds so right. There's just one problem with it. If someone says there isn't the truth, only my truth, what you want to ask them is that just your truth or the truth? Is this claim up here just your truth? In other words, it's just your opinion. Because if it's just your opinion, then why should I believe it? But if you're saying that this isn't just your truth, it's the truth, you just got done telling me there is no such thing as the truths. You see, this is a the truth claim, claiming there are no the truths. You see the problem with it? It's self-defeating. Now, I know this is very unpopular in our culture today, but there's no such thing as your truth or my truth. There's just the truth. If you're going to say, I've got my truth, you've got your truth, you might as well say to somebody, look, I have my own math. You know, suppose you hire me to do something, and you say, Frank, I'll pay you $10 an hour, and I work 15 hours on the job. And I come to you and I say, I worked 15 hours, you owe me $15,000. And you go, what? No, I owe you $150. And I go, oh, no, I have my own math, right? What are you going to say? You're crazy. No. There's only one math here we're talking about, and there's only one truth. It's not your truth or my truth. It's just the truth. Now, sometimes people don't say it this way. Sometimes they'll say it this way. It's true for you, but not for me. Well, Christianity may be true for you, but Buddhism's true for me. What do you say to that? This is also self-defeating. It's just a little bit more subtle. If somebody says it's true for you, but not for me, you ought to say, hey, is that true for everybody? Is true for you, but not for me, true for everybody? Because if true for you, but not for me is true for everybody, then true for you, but not for me can't be true because it's true for everybody. Did I say that right? I know that can give you intellectual constipation if you think about it long enough, but that's because it's self-defeating. It's like saying I can't speak a word in English. Actually, there's a more fun way of dealing with this. If somebody says it's true for you, but not for me, say, sure, go try that with your bank teller. Yeah, go to your bank teller and say, I'd like $100,000 out of my account. Bank teller looks at your account and says, I'm sorry, I only have $6.12 in your account. It's easy to get the money. You simply say, that's true for you, but not for me. Give me the 100 grand. Are you going to get the money? No, if it's true there was only $6.12 in your account, that's true for all people at all times, in all places, when referring to your account at that time. It's just true. You know, I go to a lot of churches. I normally ask people, do you think Christianity's true? Most people will say yes, and then I'll ask them why. Do you know what answer I get more than any other? Because I have faith. Is that a good answer? Does your faith change whether or not God exists or Jesus rose from the dead? No, your faith doesn't change a thing about those things. I mean, do you have to believe something to make it true? Do you have to believe in gravity to stay on the ground? Do people who don't believe in gravity float away? Hey, look, there's another one. Hey, if you believe, you'll come back. No, that's not the way it works. You say, why is the Bible always talking about faith then? Because there's two kinds of faith. There's belief that, and then there's belief in. Belief that is getting evidence that Christianity is true. This is what we call apologetics. Doesn't mean you're saying you're sorry. It means you're giving evidence for what you believe. Getting evidence that God exists, that Jesus rose from the dead, that the Bible writers are telling the truth. But all the belief that in the world won't get your moral transgressions forgiven. For that, you got to go from belief that to belief in, to trust in. I mean, we know the difference between belief that and belief in relationships, don't we? When I first met my wife 37 years ago, I got evidence that she would be a good wife, but all the evidence in the world didn't make her my wife. I had to take a step of trust in her to ask her to be my wife. And in a momentary lapse of judgment, she said yes. That's the difference between belief that and belief in. In fact, James, the half-brother of Jesus, who wrote that little book in the New Testament called Tigers, you are sharp tonight. James said, even the demons believe that God exists, but they tremble. Do you know that demons, if they exist at all, they know that God exists better than we do? They're in the spiritual realm, but they don't trust in him. There's a difference between belief that and belief in. Belief that is just of the head. Belief in is not only of the head, it's of the heart. And if you don't want to go from belief that to belief in, you don't have to. God is not going to force you into heaven against your will. If you don't want him now, you're not going to want him in eternity. Now, most of the time, when the Bible is talking about faith, it's talking about the second kind, belief in, which means trust in. After you know that Jesus is the Savior, trust in him. That's what it means. Faith does not mean having no evidence. Faith means trusting in what you have good evidence to believe is true. Trusting in what you have good evidence to believe is true, and if that's the definition of faith, everybody has faith. Atheists have faith. Muslims have faith. Buddhists have faith. Everyone has faith. You're trusting in what you have good evidence to believe is true. How about this? What if you hear a claim like this? There's no truth in anything but science. You might hear that here at the university. If you turn the claim on itself, what question are you going to ask back? Yeah, you're going to say, hey, is that a scientific truth? Can you go in the laboratory and prove that? No, that's a philosophical claim. You can't prove that in the laboratory. In fact, science is built on philosophy. You can't do science without philosophy. In fact, you can't do any academic endeavor without philosophy. When you get a PhD, what does the PH stand for? Philosophy of history, philosophy of biology, philosophy of physics. You can't even read the Bible without philosophy. You need philosophy to know anything. Why? Why? Well, think about science for a second. We have a book called Stealing from God. In that book, in the chapter on science, here's the title of the chapter. Science doesn't say anything, scientists do. Why do I say that? Because all data needs to be gathered, and then all data needs to be interpreted. And who does that? Scientists do that. You ever wonder why you get conflicting advice on COVID? Why? Well, if the scientists have good data and they interpret it properly, you'll get good advice. But if they have bad data and they don't interpret it, or it doesn't matter how they interpret it, you're going to get bad advice. They may even have good data and interpret it poorly and you'll get bad advice. Sometimes there's a political agenda. No. Are you kidding me? Ladies and gentlemen, why do we think that scientists are immune to the same three temptations the rest of us are not immune to? Sex, money, and power. Everybody is susceptible to those three temptations. And sometimes when people want to maintain power, they may get the data they want or interpret the data they want the way they want to interpret it. No, I'm not saying all scientists do this, don't get me wrong. All I'm saying is science doesn't say a word. Scientists say things. And the most important things in life, by the way, have nothing to do with science. Honey, do you love me? Yeah. Why? I don't know. Let's run an experiment. No. So this is self-defeating. We get some truth from science, but you certainly don't get all of it. Also, how about this? You should doubt everything. You've probably heard people say this. It's a skeptical claim. What's the problem with the claim? Yeah, should I doubt that? Why are skeptics skeptical of everything but skepticism? You notice they don't doubt skepticism. They think it's true. Now, how many people in here, regardless of whether or not you're Christian, atheist, anywhere in between, how many people in here sometimes doubt that what you believe about God is true? Look, if you don't have your hand up right now, you're probably not thinking very much. Look, I've written books on this stuff, and sometimes I wake up in the morning and I go, I don't even know if this is true. You ever do that? But then I start thinking about my doubts, and I realize my doubts are emotional. They're not intellectual. In other words, the evidence for Christianity is really good, and if I'm having a good day, everything's fine. Bad day, don't know. Good day, fine. Bad day, don't know. Good day, fine. Bad day, don't know. What's changing, me or the evidence? Me, I'm going up and down. I'm fluctuating. And sometimes I realize this and I go, you know, the evidence is good, and I ought to start doubting my doubts. Now, to show you that sometimes psychology can take over, sometimes at these events, we'll have the microphone set up later, I'll meet atheists who will say, you know, Frank, I used to be a Christian, but I lost my faith. You know what I want to say? I want to say this. So, are you telling me because your psychology changed that God has somehow popped out of existence? Because your psychology changed that Jesus didn't rise from the dead? You know, your psychology is not going to tell you the truth about anything outside your skull. I mean, think about, there are some people that can't fly. They're afraid to get on an airplane. Psychologically, they can't handle it for whatever reason. But what does the evidence show? The evidence show that flying is the safest way to get anywhere. And yet, some people can't do it. They're allowing their psychology to overwhelm the evidence. Don't allow your psychology to overwhelm the evidence about God. Your psychology can change with the weather, and I notice it changes. Let's go about 2/3 of the way in. Let's see if we can find the same spot. Right? You go, no, we couldn't do that. The numbers are valuable, but we tend to think if it's got a number in front of it, we can take it out and make it say whatever we want. You can't do that. Now, I'm going to annoy a lot of you here right now, but I don't care. I'm leaving tomorrow. Okay? Jeremiah 29:11 does not apply to you. You know, oh, the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you. Who's that written to? That's written to the exiles that went to Babylon in 586 BC under Nebuchadnezzar. So unless you're 2,600 years old living in present-day Iraq under Nebuchadnezzar, that passage does not apply to you. It's not to you. I always ask people, you know, when you quote Jeremiah 29:11, why don't you quote Jeremiah 44:11? What's in Jeremiah 44:11? That's what God says he's going to do to the exiles who went to Egypt. And God said, don't go to Egypt. You know what Jeremiah 44:11 says? I will destroy you and all Judah. You don't see that stitched into a pillow, right? You don't see that on a birthday card. Happy birthday. I will destroy you and all Judah. Thank you so much, Grandma. That's so sweet. No. You've got to take the passage in context. So let's go back to Matthew chapter 7. Jesus doesn't say, judge not, and stop right there. What does he say? He says, judge not, lest you be judged by the same standard you judge others. You be judged by that standard. So before you try and take the speck out of your brother's eye, take the log out of your own eye first, then you'll be better able to help your brother. Is Jesus telling us not to judge here? No, he's telling us to take the speck out of your brother's eye. In fact, he even says, you hypocrite, which is a judgment, right? He's telling you to take the speck out of your brother's eye. He's simply saying, get that problem out of your life first so you can better help your brother. So this is not a command not to judge. It's actually a command on how to judge. In other words, don't judge hypocritically. If you've got that problem, fix it, then go help your brother. But it would be completely ridiculous to say don't make judgments. Number one, it's a judgment itself. Number two, you'd be dead already if you didn't make judgments. You made 100 judgments just getting over here tonight. And now you're going, this was not a good judgment. This guy's kind of crazy. Why did we even come here? No. I mean, everybody makes judgments. Atheists make judgments. They judge there's no God. They judge Jesus didn't rise from the dead. They judge the Bible's not telling the truth. They judge there's no meaning to life. It's hopeless. When you die, you're just going to become worm food. It's over. Have a nice day. These are all judgments. The question isn't whether or not you can make judgments. The question is, are your judgments true? I will say this, though. Jesus did save a very stern rebuke for people who were judgmental. And who were the judgmental ones in his day? The Pharisees. Who were the Pharisees? What was their job? What did they do? They were the religious and political leaders of Israel. They were on the Sanhedrin. That was the Jewish ruling council to whom Rome delegated much of the day-to-day legal authority to. They were the lawmakers. They were politicians. And Jesus went after these people. Are you telling me Jesus got involved in politics? Yes! And he wasn't so nice doing it. In fact, if you think Jesus was a sweet guy who's never said a bad word about anyone, you have not read John chapter 2, John chapter 8, or Matthew chapter 23. What happens in John chapter 2? Jesus makes a whip and he goes and he jacks people up in the temple. And then in John chapter 8, he's having an argument with these Pharisees, and he's right in the middle of the argument, and he says, "Your father is the devil." Jesus, you can't say that. That's not very Christ-like. Excuse me, I am Christ. Can you imagine you have an argument with somebody and you say, "Your father is the devil"? Never try that with a sibling, by the way. And then in Matthew chapter 23, Jesus is again going after these Pharisees. And what does he say? "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Oh, you look great on the outside. You're whitewashed tombs. But on the inside, you're full of dead man's bones. You go a mile to make a convert, and then once you make them a convert, you make them twice as much a son of hell as you are. How will you avoid being condemned to hell?" What? Sweet and gentle Jesus said this? Yes, Jesus was not Barney, the LSU-colored purple dinosaur. He was not Mr. Rogers. Can you say kindness, boys and girls? Look, he was kind most of the time, but he certainly didn't go around saying, "This sermon brought to you by the letter S." No, Jesus was tough. In fact, why did they kill Jesus? Number one, because he claimed to be God, and that was blasphemy to the Jews and sedition to the Romans. He didn't go get killed for skipping around saying, "Love your neighbor," right? That doesn't get you killed. And secondly, he spoke to who knew that if Jesus succeeded, they were out of work. This is why Caiaphas, the high priest, who knew Jesus had resurrected Lazarus from the dead, said, "It's better that one innocent man die than the whole nation perish." What was he trying to maintain? Sex, money, power. He wanted to keep his power. And he knew Jesus was the Messiah. At least he had evidence he was. So don't buy into this idea you can't make judgments. Everybody makes judgments. By the way, I've noticed one other thing about judging. Do you ever notice that when you compliment somebody, which is a judgment, nobody gets upset? You know, if you say to your best friend, "I really love you. You're such a wonderful person. I wish I could be like you." You think your friend's going to say, "Well, who are you to judge?" Right? Your friend's never going to say that. I've noticed that people really don't have a problem with judging. They just have a problem with judgments they don't like. In fact, if you tell somebody something that's true and they get upset with you, you just help convict them. As Augustine said, we love the truth when it enlightens us. We hate the truth when it convicts us. A few military people in here. By the way, I was in the Navy for 8 years, which stands for never again volunteer yourself. For you military people in here, you always get more flack when you're over the target. If you tell somebody something that's true and they're shooting back at you, you're over the target. They don't want their evil deeds exposed. Jesus said, "Men love darkness rather than light." So don't buy into this idea you can't make judgments. You have to make judgments, but you have to make judgments without being judgmental. As someone put it, evangelism is just one beggar showing another beggar where the food is. Because none of us can make it to God on our own. Now, we could go through many more of these statements. We don't have time. We got to wrap this section up. Can everybody see that this statement right here shoots itself? And every other statement we just went through shoots itself. They can't be true, which is saying that relativism and postmodernism can't be true because they claim it's true that there is no truth. You with me so far? Yeah. All right. Now, you really can't get away from truth. Well, actually, you can, temporarily. How do you get away from it? You suppress it to go your own way. This is what Paul talks about in his letter to the church at Rome, that people suppress the truth to go their own way. In fact, when we have the Q&A mic set up later, if you're not a Christian, I may ask you this question, and it's not fair for me to ask you a question without giving you warning. I may ask you this question. Here's the question I might ask you so you can think about it. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? I've had atheists stand at that microphone in front of hundreds of people and say, no. No. Wait, I thought you claimed to be reasonable. I thought you claimed to be rational. How is it reasonable you wouldn't believe if something were true? It's not. The problem's not in the head, the problem's in the heart. They don't want it to be true. They don't want there to be a God. Why? They want to be God of their own lives. They're not on a truth quest, they're on a happiness quest. In fact, many Christians are on a happiness quest too. We're not on a truth quest. We want to go hear a sermon of 5 ways to make you happy. So I always ask, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? In fact, if you're having a discussion with somebody who's not a Christian, ask that. They might say, well, if atheism were true, would you become an atheist? Fair question, right? Pascal said something very interesting. He said, people almost invariably base their beliefs not on the basis of proof, but on the basis of what they find attractive. Are you just believing, if you're a Christian, in Christianity because you find it attractive? Or if you're an atheist or some other belief system, just because you find that attractive? Or do you really think it's true? It fits the facts. One other thing about this. I know there's probably plenty of people in this room that have been hurt by the church, that have been hurt by other Christians. You say, well, what do you say to somebody like that other than I'm sorry? What you say is this. If someone plays Beethoven poorly, who do you blame? Do you blame Beethoven? No, you blame the player. Well, if somebody plays Christ poorly, who do you blame? Do you blame Christ? Or do you blame the player, the Christian? Don't blame Christ. Just because Christians are not true and beautiful, that doesn't mean Jesus isn't true and beautiful. In fact, none of us would need Jesus if we were perfect. We wouldn't need a Savior. So don't let a bad experience keep you away from the God who died for you. And you'll say, well, how do I know He died for me? We're about to see. Let's move to the next question. Does God exist? We know that truth exists. The next question, is it true that God exists? And I said there are 3 arguments we're going to look at. The first argument is from the beginning of the universe, known as the cosmological argument. Cosmological comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe. And it says if the universe had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. The second argument is the argument from design, known as the teleological argument. Telos is a Greek word meaning design or purpose. It says if there's design in the universe and design in life, there must be a designer. Now, these 2 arguments have some scientific evidence behind it. We'll see a little bit of that here in a minute. The third argument doesn't have any science behind it, yet it's the argument we've all known since we were very small children. It's more of a philosophical argument, and it's the argument from morality known as the moral argument. And it says if there's one thing morally wrong out there, just one, like it's wrong to torture babies for fun, or it's wrong to murder 6 million people in a Holocaust, or it's wrong to invade a neighboring country without provocation, then there has to be a God. Why? Because if there is no standard beyond humanity, then everything's just a matter of opinion. That would be just your opinion against a baby torturer's opinion, or your opinion against Hitler's opinion, or your opinion against Putin's opinion. If there's no standard, a standard of righteousness and goodness that we're obligated to obey, then you can't say anything's right or wrong. But we all know things are really right, and other things, therefore, are really wrong, so God must exist. But we're going to start right up here at the cosmological argument. Now you got to admit it was worth coming out here tonight just to see God do that, right? I know a lot of you are saying, I've never seen God move. Oh, really? Check this out. Now, this is the argument that many say points back to the big... Now, I know there's some Christians in here going, Frank, we're Christians in here and we don't believe in the Big Bang. You guys don't believe in the Big Bang? I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. In fact, the evidence for the Big Bang is so good that even atheistic scientists are admitting it. Stephen Hawking, who was probably the top physicist in the world until he died about 5 years ago, put it this way: almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Now, Hawking tried to come up with another explanation other than God, but he failed. Yet he's admitting that space-time and matter literally had a beginning out of nothing. Once there was nothing, no space, no matter, no time, and then space-time and matter came into existence. Now, what is nothing? Aristotle had a good definition of nothing. He said, nothing is what rocks dream about. Now, it wasn't just Hawking who said this kind of thing. This is Alexander Vilenkin, a Russian cosmologist who teaches at Tufts University. He's an agnostic. Here's the way he put it. With the proof now in place, cosmologists, by the way, a cosmologist is not someone that puts on your makeup, all right? Someone that studies the universe. Cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is now no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Now, two interesting words in this quote here. First is the word proof. Very infrequent for scientists to use the word proof. Why? Because science is tentative. Scientific theories are overturned all the time. But what Vilenkin sees so much evidence pointing to one conclusion that he says, look, I'm constituting it as a proof. And then this word problem, why is it a problem that there's a cosmic beginning? Because if space-time and matter had a beginning, then whatever created space-time and matter can't be made of space-time and matter. In other words, if nature had a beginning, whatever created nature must be beyond nature, something we would call supernature. Now, Vilenkin is a believer in the multiverse. Have you heard of the multiverse? There are many universes out there, and ours just appears to be designed. Well, there's no evidence for this. But you know what Vilenkin admits? He says, even if my theory's true, it doesn't get rid of the need for an absolute beginning. Now, he doesn't think it was God that began it, but what else could it be? In fact, let's just jump to the bottom line. We're not going through the evidence. Number one, we don't have time. Number two, it's all in the book. Number three, it's not controversial. We're just going to jump to the bottom line. What's controversial is what caused the space-time continuum to come into existence. So, it seems to me we've got two options. Either no one created something out of nothing, which is the atheistic view, or someone created something out of nothing, which is the theistic view. Now, here's my question. Which view is more reasonable? That no one created something out of nothing, or that someone created something out of nothing? What do you think? Number two, right? I was at Texas A&M. This had to be 15 years ago. And I put this slide up, and an atheist said, I think number one is more reasonable. I said, time out, let's look at number two. Number two says, someone created something out of nothing. Now, that's a miracle, right? But at least you got a miracle worker. You got someone. Number one is a miracle with no miracle worker. That's clearly absurd. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, do you realize that everyone believes in at least one miracle? Christians believe in more than one, but atheists believe in at least one. That no one created something out of nothing. That somehow this universe came into existence either without a cause or by some cause we don't know about. That's a miracle. Now, I said to the audience that night at Texas A&M, I said, to show you how seriously we all take the law of causality. By the way, the law of causality doesn't say everything has a cause. The law of causality says everything that comes to be has a cause. There has to be an uncaused first cause. Look, it's either the universe or something outside the universe that has always existed, because you can't go on an infinite regress of causes. So I said to the audience that night at A&M, I said, to show you how seriously we all take the law of causality, that things don't pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause. There is nobody sitting here in this auditorium tonight who is currently worried that as you sit here, a hippopotamus has appeared out of nothing, by nothing, in your dorm room and is currently pooping on your pillow. Right? You're not worried about that. Why? Because you know that things don't pop into existence out of nothing by nothing without a cause. And if the whole universe could do so, why doesn't everything do so? Why don't Teslas pop into existence out of nothing by nothing without a cause? You wake up one morning, you look outside, your Hyundai is a Tesla. You go, how do I charge this thing? Why don't MacBook Pros pop into existence out of nothing by nothing without a cause? Could have saved me $4,000. Suppose you're hungry after this seminar tonight, you want to have a pizza. Does it make sense to order one? Or should you just sit in your dorm room, wait, and hope one pops into existence out of nothing by nothing without a cause? No. It seems to me the atheists have all the faith. Because the best explanation is that someone created something out of nothing. In fact, here's a question to ask an atheist. If there is no God, why is there something rather than nothing at all? This is the question the philosopher Leibniz posed. Why does anything exist if there's no God? Now think about it this way, ladies and gentlemen. If space, matter, and time had a beginning out of nothing, which is what the evidence shows, not just from science, but also philosophy, then whatever created space, time, and matter can't be made of space, time, and matter. It must transcend space, time, and matter. So the cause must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create, because to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice, and only persons can make choices. Also, the being would have to be intelligent, to have a mind to make a choice. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of? God. You say, well, how do you know it's the Christian God, Frank? We don't. Yet. This could be Allah or some other theistic or deistic God. We don't know yet. But if we keep going through the questions and we realize that Jesus rose from the dead, then we can say that the same being that walked out of the tomb 1,989 years ago is the same being in whose divine nature created the universe out of nothing. We haven't gotten there yet. This one argument gives us a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, but we don't know who this being is yet. So let's keep going and look at some of the other evidence. The second line of evidence or argument for God, a theistic God, is called the teleological argument, and there's two aspects to this. The fact that the universe is designed and the fact that you are designed, that life is designed. Let's take a look at the universe first. Scientists have discovered in recent decades that the universe is fine-tuned to support life, that if you were to change any one of a number of factors about our universe, virtually imperceptibly, there would be no universe or no universe that could support life. In fact, let's go back to Stephen Hawking, again an atheist. Here's the way he put it. If the expansion rate of the universe was different by 1 part in 1,000 million, a second after the Big Bang, the universe would have collapsed back on itself or never developed galaxies. In other words, if the expansion rate was that infinitesimally different from the very beginning, none of us would be here. Now, you can't make any sort of evolutionary explanation for this. You can't say the expansion rate evolved by chance to this point somehow. Why? Because this is the initial expansion rate. This is how it began. It started there. It seems to me the same being that created space, time, and matter is the same being that fine-tuned the expansion precisely what it needed to be right now, or at that time. Also, the expansion rate right now is fine-tuned. The gravitational force, if that were altered by more than 1 part in 10 to the 40th power, compared to the strong nuclear force, we wouldn't exist. What's 1 part in 10 to the 40th power? Cover the entire North American continent in dimes to the moon, and do that on 1 billion other North American continents. Then mark 1 dime randomly in that series of piles, blindfold your friend, throw him in that big pile, and have him randomly pick out 1 dime. The chance that he would pick out the one marked would be 1 chance in 10 to the 40th power. That's 1 chance in 1 with 40 zeros following it. Now, what's the best explanation for that? Look, that value was either designed or it wasn't designed. What makes more sense? It was designed. In fact, this is just one of a couple of dozen of these factors, or at least a dozen of them. Change any one of these factors, nothing exists. In fact, Christopher Hitchens, a guy I debated many years ago. You guys know who Christopher Hitchens was? A brilliant British atheist who sounded more brilliant than he was because he had a British accent, you know. Anyway, Hitchens said, this is the hardest argument to answer for an atheist. Why is everything so precise? By the way, it's not just our universe that appears to be designed with us in mind. Our solar system is too. Let's take a look at the solar system. Here we are, a third rock from the sun. If we were just a little bit closer to, a little bit further away, we couldn't survive. A little bit closer to, we'd burn up. A little bit further away, we'd freeze. We are what scientists call the Goldilocks zone. It's not too hot. It's not too cold. It is. That's a lie. It's way too hot here in the summer. The axial tilt, 23.5 degrees. Change that slightly, we don't exist. Earth rotation, 24 hours. Change that slightly, we don't exist. The size and distance of the moon from us. Change that slightly, we don't exist. If Jupiter right here was not in its current orbit, we couldn't exist here on Earth. Why? What does Jupiter do for us? Jupiter attracts most of the meteors and space junk to it rather than us. It's a cosmic vacuum cleaner. In fact, if you take a close-up look at Jupiter, you know what these big marks are? Those are comet fragment strikes that are bigger than the Earth. Thank God for Jupiter. Because if Jupiter wasn't there, we wouldn't be here. Saturn does the same thing. In fact, let's take a look at the size of the planets. Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Earth. Look at poor Pluto down here. You know, Pluto recently has been demoted as a planet. I don't know about you, but I think it's size discrimination. And what if Pluto identifies as a planet? What then, you bigots? Take a look at this. You can hardly see Pluto. Take a look at this. That's Arcturus. That's another star in our galaxy. The sun is the sun is here. Jupiter is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Earth is invisible. Pluto, forget about it. All right, keep an eye on Arcturus here. Where's Arcturus now? That's another star in our galaxy. The sun is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Jupiter is invisible. Earth, Pluto, forget about them. In fact, if the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Betelgeuse here would be, look, I don't name the stars, okay? If the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Betelgeuse would be 5 or 6 Empire State Buildings high. The heavens are awesome. And that's just in our galaxy. This is not outside our galaxy. This is inside our galaxy. And the average distance between stars in our galaxy is 30 trillion miles, and all that distance is necessary for us to exist here on Earth. If the distances were different, we wouldn't be here. Now, how far is 30 trillion miles? Far. It'll take you at least 2 tanks of gas and a Toyota Prius to go 30 trillion miles. A number of years ago, my wife and I took our sons to the Desert Museum in Tucson, Arizona. If you ever get a chance to go to Tucson, go to the south side of the city, other side of the mountain. If you go out there on a clear night, it's so dark that you can see thousands of stars in the sky. So we're out there this one night. This had to be like 20, 25 years ago. The guide says, wow, it's so clear tonight that if we look up at 9:03, we'll see the space shuttle in orbit. I said, come on, we're not going to see the space shuttle. It's only 120 feet long. It's 350 miles up. We're not going to see it. Oh, me of little faith. At 9:03, the guide goes, look! And we look up in the sky about 70 degrees above the horizon. There's an object streaking across the western desert sky relative to us about like this. I mean, it's really cooking. When it got right about here, it disappeared. I don't know whether Scotty beamed it up or what. Actually, what happened was, despite the fact that we were in total darkness, the space shuttle was so high up that the sun was still reflecting off of it, and when it got out of the range of the sun, we couldn't see it anymore. Now, when the space shuttle was in orbit, the space shuttle was traveling at about 18,000 miles an hour. That's 5 miles per second. You got trouble getting to school in the morning? Take the space shuttle. Right. You'll be 5 miles a second. Think about how fast that is. Well, I did a little calculation. I tried to figure out how long would it take us if we could get in the space shuttle and go from our star, the sun, to another star an average distance away inside our galaxy 30 trillion miles. In other words, how long would it take us to go 30 trillion miles if we could go 5 miles per second? How long do you think it would take us? You must be a math major. A long time. Yeah, it would take us 201,450 years. That means if you got in the space shuttle at the time of Christ and started traveling from our star, the sun, to another star an average distance away in our galaxy, you've been going 5 miles a second for 2,000 years. You would be less than 1/100th of the way there right now. And we're going to explore space. No, we're not. We're not going anywhere in space. We can hardly get out of our solar system. It took us 9 years to get to Pluto. Do you know that if a quarter represented our solar system, do you know the next star would be 2 football fields away? There's no way we're getting to another planetary system. It's too far and it's too dangerous. If we go light speed, 186,000 miles a second, it would take you almost 4 years to get there. Let's imagine we figure this kind of travel out. In fact, what I'm about to show you is going to be disturbing, but I'm going to show it to you anyway. Suppose we get to another planet someday, we plant our flag, and then this happens. Beans are not for astronauts, ladies and gentlemen. Now, to show you how analytical my wife is, I showed her that video, and she smiled just a little bit, and she said, "That's illogical. There's no sound in space." Notice what the psalmists say. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him. So the psalmist is saying, you want to know what God is like? His love is as high as the heavens are above the earth. Well, the question is, how high are the heavens above the earth? The Hubble Space Telescope has helped us discover that. In fact, a number of years ago, they trained the Hubble Space Telescope on 1/26 millionth of the sky. What's 1/26 millionth of the sky? Go outside tonight, put a piece of rice on the end of your finger, hold it up. That piece of rice represents about 1/26 millionth of the sky. So they trained Hubble on this dot in the sky for about 11 days of exposure time. This is called Hubble Ultra Deep Field. What I'm about to show you, you can find online. It's in the public domain. Just Google Hubble Ultra Deep Field. In fact, I don't know if you can see this, but along the bottom of this here, these are mountains. This is the southern hemisphere right here. This is the southern hemisphere. I'm going to show you a composite video from Hubble Ultra Deep Field. And when I show it to you, the constellations are going to come up, and then Hubble is going to zoom out to that 1/26 millionth dot in the sky. There is no audio, just video. Are you ready? All right, here's what Hubble found. There are the constellations. Let's go see what's out there. What you're looking at are nearly 10,000 galaxies, each with billions of stars of their own in 1/26 millionth of the sky. So how many stars are there in the entire universe then? The number of stars in the entire universe are about equivalent to the number of grains of sand on all the beaches on all the earth times 100,000. And to go from one star to another star just inside our galaxy, going 5 miles a second will take you over 200,000 years. Now you know why the Bible says the heavens declare the glory of God. I never want to hear any tiger ever use the word awesome again unless you're talking about God or the heavens. Awesome shot, dude. Awesome TikTok video, dude. Awesome shirt, dude. No! What word are you going to save for this? By the way, I only showed you half the verse a minute ago. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far as he removed our transgressions from us. Yes, God's love is infinite, so is his justice. So how does he remove our transgressions from us? He takes our injustice upon himself. He pays the price for us. Now, when you think about a universe with stars equivalent to sand grains on 100,000 Earths, and it would take you over 200,000 years to go just between two of those stars, does that make you feel insignificant? It shouldn't. Why? Because as majestic as the heavens are, they're not made in the image of God, but you are. In fact, this is you in the womb at 11 weeks. Question, is this animal, mineral, vegetable, or human? In fact, let's go back prior to 11 weeks. Let's go all the way back to when your mother and your father got together to conceive you. Have you guys had this talk before? I see some young people in here, so I'll try and be discreet. I also see some older people in here, so I'll try and be discreet as well, just in case you've forgotten how this works. When your mother and your father got together to conceive you, your mother unconsciously perfumed her egg to attract your father, and then your father sent the entire population of the United States, 300 million soldiers, toward your mother's egg. And then there was a race. And you won. That's right. Don't let anyone ever tell you you're not special. You beat out 300 million others. You have blown away anything Michael Phelps has done. Now, seeing some of you limp in here earlier makes it hard for me to believe you were the fastest soldier in the gene pool, but you were. Now, your soldier was 20 to 30 times smaller than a grain of salt, yet it contained half of the 3.5 billion letter software program, your genome, your DNA, all the letters in the right order, and your mother's egg was about the size of a period at the end of its average sentence in an average book, and it contained the other half of the 3.5 billion letter genome software program, DNA, that makes you you. And when your soldier and your egg came together, a new 100% genetic human being was created. Do you know you have not received any more genetic information from this point until right now? Your genetic information has just duplicated itself. In fact, there were only 4 things separating you from adulthood: time, air, water, and food. Those are the same 4 things that separate a 2-year-old from adulthood. Does this have implications on the abortion issue? Yeah, I think it does. We don't kill the 2-year-old. Why do we kill the unborn child in the womb? Genetically, it's the same. You say, wait a minute, Frank, you can't legislate morality. All right, no extra charge for this. This was the subject of our first book, creatively titled Legislating Morality. All laws legislate morality. All laws declare one behavior right and the opposite behavior wrong. You can't think of a law which doesn't legislate morality. The only question is, whose morality should we legislate? And when people say, well, don't impose your morality on me, the first thing I say is, why not? Would that be immoral? Because you're imposing your morality on me right now. You're saying I ought not impose ought-nots, and you're telling me I can't do that. You're imposing your morality on me. But actually, the better answer is this. If somebody says, don't impose your morality on me, what you should say is, this isn't my morality. I didn't make this stuff up. I didn't make up the fact that murder's wrong, that rape is wrong, that abortion's wrong, that theft is wrong, that men were made for women and women were made for men, and the best way to perpetuate and stabilize society, which is the reason the government's involved in marriage to begin with, is to legally recognize that man-woman relationship over every other relationship. I didn't make any of this stuff up. This isn't my morality. This isn't your morality. This just happens to be the morality. The one Thomas Jefferson said was self-evident. The one the Apostle Paul said, the Gentiles are not of the law written on their hearts. Everybody knows this morality, but some of us suppress it because we want to go our own way. Look, if you have a problem with the morality, you don't have a problem with me. I didn't make it up. You have a problem with the Creator upon whose nature this morality is derived. All right, no extra charge for that. Let's go back to this. From this point till right now, a construction project of astonishing complexity began taking place. Cells began multiplying at a rate of 4,000 cells per second. Brain cells began multiplying at a rate of 100,000 cells per second. For most of you anyway. Some cells became brain cells, others heart cells, others lung cells. How did they know how to do this? Nobody knows. Some cells went so far across you to become what they needed to become that it would be equivalent to you today walking across the United States alone. And that construction project continues to this very moment. You just made 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another, knock it off. Are you thinking about this? Are you going, wait a minute, Frank, time out, I got to concentrate. New red blood cells coming up. No, this is just happening. It's happening automatically. How? Well, Aristotle noticed something like 2,400 years ago. He didn't know anything about blood cells, but he noticed that all of nature is going in a direction. For example, you ever notice that an acorn, if it's properly nourished, always becomes an oak tree? Why doesn't it become an elm tree? Or a birch tree, or a seahorse? You say, well, it's programmed to become an oak tree. Well, who programmed it? And by the way, is an acorn conscious? Is an acorn in the ground going, all right, what do I have to do to become an oak tree? No. But if it's properly nourished, it reliably goes in the direction of becoming an oak tree. If it reliably goes in a direction, but it doesn't have a mind of its own, there must be an external mind directing it toward an end. That's what Aristotle called the unmoved mover. Thomas Aquinas came along in the 1200s AD and he said, this is going to be my fifth way to argue for God. That all of nature is going in a direction. If it's going in a direction, there's got to be a director. That's my term, not his. There's a mind behind this. By the way, this is why we can do science. Why can we do science? Because the world is orderly. It's going in a direction. Things don't happen randomly. They're predictable. Because there's a mind behind all this. In fact, God just doesn't create the universe and then he leaves it. God creates the universe and sustains it. You know what? Aristotle mistakenly thought the universe was eternal. But he said, even if that's the case, you need an unmoved mover. Why? Because you need a being to sustain nature every single second of existence. In other words, this is not a Big Bang cause way back when. We've already talked about that. This is a cause every single second the universe exists. God is to the universe what a band is to music. If a band were up here playing music, the band would be creating and sustaining the music, right? What would happen to the music the second the band stopped playing? Music would be over. Same thing is true with God. He creates the universe. He creates the natural forces. that govern it. He keeps them going. He creates you. All the forces that govern you keeps them going every single second. This is why Paul comes along and says, in him we live and move and have our being. And Christ holds all things together. And the writer of Hebrews says, God sustains all things by his powerful word. So you get a cause, a sustaining cause, as well as a beginning cause. The book Stealing from God has a lot more in that, but we got to move on to our final argument for God. I said we're going to spend most of our time in this. The next 2 points go pretty quickly. How about the moral argument? Let me ask you a question. How do you know that your quarterback throwing a touchdown is better than your quarterback throwing a pick six? Pick six is when your quarterback throws the ball to the other team and else. How do you know that? How do you know it's better for your quarterback throwing a touchdown than a pick six? What do you have to know in order to make that assessment? Not just the rules. What do you have to know? The goal, the purpose of the game, right? If there's no purpose, you can't say that a touchdown's better than a pick six. You can't measure one play as being good and another play as being bad if you don't know the goal or the purpose of the game. Now look, in football, the purpose of the game comes from outside the game. When the Tigers play here in the stadium, they show up. The rules are already in place, right? The field's already limed. Everybody knows what the rules are. The rules come from the NC2A, and maybe they tweak them every year a little bit, but the rules come from outside the game. And the rules are arbitrary. They could be different in football, right? But in life, the rules come from God. Now, they're not arbitrary. They come from God's nature. Now, there are rules that could be different, like don't eat pork. He changes rules like that. But thou shalt not murder doesn't change, right? They come from his nature. Now, here's my question. Suppose, who's your new coach? The Notre Dame guy. Kelly? Brian Kelly. Suppose the first game this year, I know this would never happen, but suppose you guys lose 42-0. And the players come off the field and they say, hey, Coach Kelly, we obeyed all the rules. What's he going to say? That's not the purpose of the game, right? The purpose of the game is to win, to get more points than the other team. Now, the rules may help you get that purpose, achieve that purpose, but that's not the purpose of the game. Is the purpose of life to obey the rules? Careful how you answer. No. The purpose of life is to know the rule maker, to know God and to make him known. If there is no God, if there is no rule maker, if there is no being out there that gives us purpose, then you can't say that you can't say this is a good way to live and this is a bad way to live. In fact, if there is no God, the Nazis were not wrong. How can you say the Nazis are wrong if there's no standard beyond our government? You can't. If there is no God, love is no better than rape. Oh, you might like love better. It's a preference. But it's not objectively better. It's just your opinion. If there is no God, there are no human rights. You know, there's a lot of people saying, I got a right to this and a right to that, and some of them are atheists. Do you realize there are no rights unless God exists? Everything's just your opinion against someone else's opinion. The government doesn't give you rights. The government's supposed to secure your rights. In fact, this is what the Declaration of Independence says. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men were created and endowed by their government. No, endowed by what? Their creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And governments are instituted among men to secure these rights. And when a government doesn't do that, Jefferson and his cohort said, well, the people have the right to a new government then. In fact, if there's no God, slavery and racism aren't wrong. Neither is murder. It would be just your opinion because there's no purpose. If there is no God, tolerance is no better than intolerance. By the way, Christians, are you commanded to be tolerant? No, tolerance is too weak. You're commanded to love. Love says reach out and help them. Tolerance says hold your nose and put up with them. And as we pointed out last night, love does not require approval. Every parent knows that if you approve of everything your kid wants to do, are you a loving parent? No, you don't tolerate everything your kid wants to do. You need to stand in the way of evil if you love that person. As Thomas Sowell famously said, When you tell people the truth, if you tell people what they need to hear, you're helping them. When you tell people what they want to hear, you're helping yourself. Because you're telling them what they want to hear so they don't get mad at you. It's much easier to say, yeah, go ahead, kid, do whatever you want to do. I don't really care. And you can't complain about the problem of evil if there's no God. Why? Atheists always say, well, evil disproves God. No, evil actually shows there is a God. Why? Not because God is doing evil, because there'd be no such thing as evil unless there was good, and there'd be no such thing as good unless God existed. C.S. Lewis realized this. Early on in his life, he was an atheist. He went through World War I, a terrible war, and he said, there can't be a good God. There's too much injustice in the world. And then one day he had an epiphany, and he wrote it in the book Mere Christianity. Here's what he wrote. He said, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? You see, you wouldn't know what injustice was unless you knew what justice was. You wouldn't know what a crooked line was unless you knew what a straight line was. You see, evil doesn't disprove God. It may prove there's a devil out there, but it can't disprove God. Why? Because evil is a lack in a good thing. Evil is like cancer. If you take all the cancer out of a good body, you got a better body, right? What happens if you take all the body out of the cancer? You got nothing. Evil is like rust in a car. If you take all the rust out of a car, you got a better car. What happens if you take all the car out of the rust? You got a Pinto, right? No, you got nothing. Evil can only exist in good, but good, in an objective sense, can only exist if God exists. In fact, you could put it this way. The shadows prove the sunshine. In order to have shadows, you got to have sunshine. In other words, in order to have evil, you have to have good. Oh, you can have sunshine without shadows. You can have good without evil, but you can't have shadows without sunshine. You can't have evil without good. So if evil exists, God exists. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but it's true. Now, you can ask, why does God allow certain evils? Maybe we can do that during the Q&A. But you haven't disproven God. You've actually shown he does exist. In fact, so when Christopher Hitchens says, God is not great, how religion poisons everything. First of all, what does this word poison mean? It's a fun way of saying religion is evil, right? But he has no standard by which to judge whether or not religion is evil. He's stealing a standard from God to say, you guys have done evil, to which we say, you know, we have. And now you're proving our worldview. We have done evil. That's why we all need a Savior. In fact, I said in the second debate with him, which you can see on our YouTube channel, I said, Christopher, I'm a hypocrite. I can't live up to what Jesus told me to live up to. But if I could, I wouldn't need him. In fact, when people say I can't go to church because there's too many hypocrites down there, I always say, come on down, pal. We got room for one more. Yeah, we're all hypocrites. Religion doesn't poison everything. Everything poisons religion. All right, now, what can we conclude from these three arguments? That we have a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent, moral creator who created all things and sustains all things. And we haven't even opened the Bible yet. Now, how do we know the Christian God is the true God? For that, we got to move on to the next argument, the next point, point 3. You go, Frank, you're running out of time here. How are you going to get through all this? This does not take long. Are miracles possible? Because if God exists, miracles are possible. But let's talk about the issue. Are miracles really possible? A lot of people think they're impossible. Because, like, for example, Noah. Can we all agree, Christians, can we all agree, if you're a Christian in here, can we all agree on one thing? Noah and the ark is crazy. Come on, please. And a resurrection. How many people in here have ever seen someone be dead for about, say, 36 hours or 40 hours and then rise from the dead? Crickets. None of us have. Yet if you're a Christian, you have to believe something that you and certainly no one in this room has ever seen. How rational is that? And for some reason, the big problem miracle in the Bible is Jonah. Is that a whale of a tale or a tale of a whale? I mean, what is the deal with Jonah? Can you really believe in Jonah? Now, what is the greatest miracle in the Bible? It's not the resurrection. The greatest miracle in the Bible is, I got some of you a second time. Yeah. The greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible. And here's the interesting thing, ladies and gentlemen. Atheists are admitting the data for the first verse. They don't think it's God, but what else could it be? If space, time, and matter had a beginning, we're talking about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause. So if Genesis 1:1 is true, is it possible these other verses are true? If God can create the universe out of nothing, can he do the Noah miracle? Of course Noah's crazy, unless God exists. Of course Jesus didn't rise from the dead, unless God exists. Of course Jonah's silly, unless God exists. Now, a couple quick things about miracles. Some people won't believe in a miracle because they've never seen one. That's not a good reason to disbelieve something. Why? Because you believe in a lot of things you've never seen. You believe in your mind. Have you ever seen it? You're using it right now. You believe in justice. Have you ever seen justice? Oh, you may have seen people being treated justly or unjustly, but you've never seen justice because it's not a physical thing. It's a virtue grounded in the nature of God. You've never seen gravity. Oh, Frank, come on. There's gravity right there. No, you're not seeing gravity. What are you seeing? You're seeing the effects of gravity. Do you realize we don't even know what gravity is? By the way, that's how we know that God exists. If someone were to ask you, how do you know that God exists? What you ought to say is, I know God by his effects. I've got these effects, and I'm reasoning back to a cause. If there's a creation, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause, the creator. If there's design, fine-tuning in the universe, design in life, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause, a designer. If there's a moral law pressing on my heart, and I know certain things are right, other things are wrong, there must be, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause, a moral lawgiver. If I have the ability to reason, and I understand things outside my skull, and there's these laws of logic that help me recognize that, then there has to be, that's the effect, there has to be a source outside of myself called a mind. I'm reasoning from effect to cause. That's how you know that God exists. How do you know that George Washington existed? You've never seen him. Because he's left effects behind that are best explained by a cause known as George Washington. Same thing is true with Jesus. He's left effects behind that are best explained by a person known as Jesus. One last thing on miracles. If miracles do occur, and by the way, no miracles have to occur since the New Testament for Christianity to be true. I do think miracles have occurred since then, but you don't need them. But if miracles do occur, you shouldn't expect to see many of them. Why? Because miracles, by definition, have to be rare if they're going to get our attention. Miracles are special acts of God, so people go, who should we obey? Moses can do miracles. Okay, we're going to obey him. Jesus can do miracles. Okay, he must be affirmed by God. That's the purpose of miracles. If miracles were occurring routinely, then either we wouldn't recognize them as special acts of God, or we'd say, hey, this stuff happens all the time, it's no big deal. I mean, imagine if resurrections occurred routinely. What would the resurrection of Christ mean? You go to somebody and you go, Jesus rose from the dead to prove he was God. And the guy goes, so what? Uncle Leroy just rose from the dead 2 weeks ago. Now I got to give the inheritance back, right? No, it's got to be a rare event if it's going to get your attention. So if God exists, miracles are possible, and he does exist. Now we just want to see, has he done a miracle in the New Testament that shows that Jesus actually did rise from the dead? Now, there's a lot of evidence for this. I have 8 lines of evidence. I'm only going to show you 2 because we're running out of time. 2 lines of evidence that the New Testament writers are telling the truth. One line is the fact that they put embarrassing stories in the text. What's embarrassing stories? Historians know if there's something embarrassing to the author or authors, it's probably true. Why would it be true? Because you're not going to invent things that embarrass you. You're not going to invent things that make you look bad. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you this question. How many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look good? If you don't have your hand up right now, you're lying to make yourself look good. And it's not working. We know you're lying. All right, how many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look bad? You don't do that. You might lie to make yourself look good, but you won't lie to make yourself look bad. Well, the New Testament writers have filled the New Testament with embarrassing details that make them look bad. This is true of the Old Testament as well, but let's just look at the New Testament. That's why we call this the dove factor. They're not making this up. Notice, for example, their leader, Peter, is called Satan by Jesus. Do you think they invented this? Do you think that Mark at one point said to Peter, hey, Pete, I'm going to make this a real interesting story. I'm going to have the Lord call you Satan. What do you think Peter would have said? Have him call you Satan. Look, I'm the leader here. And then Peter winds up denying Christ 3 times after saying, Lord, I'll never deny you. And then at the crucifixion, all of the disciples, maybe with the exception of one, they all run away. This is like a Monty Python movie. Run away. And who are the brave ones that don't run away? The women. The women are the brave ones. Now, who wrote the New Testament documents down? Men. Now, what man is going to invent that he was hiding for fear of the Jews? Why the women went down and discovered the empty tomb. Would any man in here invent that? If I was there, I'd make myself look good. I wouldn't embarrass myself. I'd write something down like this. Let's see. We marched right down there and we overpowered that elite Roman guard. That sounds pretty good. What do you think? Yep. Then we saw Jesus, who congratulated us on our great faith. And then we went and comforted the trembling women. I would never say it was Mr. Sissy Pants. While the women went down and discovered the empty tomb. And oh, by the way, why would you never say the women were the first witnesses in that culture? Forget about the fact it was embarrassing to men. It was. But why would you never say the women were the first witnesses independent of that? Why? Yes, because a woman's testimony was not considered on par with that of a man. They could testify, but it didn't count as much as a man. So if you're only making, if you're trying to pass off the New Testament resurrection story as true, you'd never have the women be the first witnesses. You'd only have the men be the first witnesses. And you certainly wouldn't have one of your witnesses being a formerly demon-possessed woman, right? What a great witness, right? Yet all 4 Gospels say the women were the first witnesses, which is telling us what? They really were. As embarrassing as it was. Actually, I had a lady come up to me once. She said, Frank, I know why Jesus appeared to the women first. I said, why? And she said, because he wanted to get the story out. I said, that is an excellent point. I hadn't thought of that. Because ladies, when your man comes home from work, does he say much? There could have been a nuclear explosion down at the plant. He's not going to tell you. You'll see it on the news before you hear it from him. You'll be watching the news going, hey, hon, what happened? Oh, yeah, I forgot to tell you the nuke blew up. I've been hot for 3 days. What's for dinner, right? He's not going to tell you. I can't even believe this next passage is in the Bible, but it is. You know the end of the Gospel of Matthew, where Jesus is giving his disciples the Great Commission. This is the climax. This is what you're supposed to do after I ascend to heaven. He says, go therefore, make disciples of all nations. Notice he doesn't say make believers. There's a difference, right? Make disciples of all nations. And right in that text, it says right there in verse 17, of his disciples, some believed, but some doubted. He's standing, resurrected, right in front of them, and they're doubting. They're like, you see that guy over there? Yep. That guy over there is Jesus. Oh, no, it can't be Jesus. He was just killed not long ago. No, I'm telling you, it's him. Look, the Romans killed him. He's dead. No, it's him. Look, they crucified him. After they whipped him, they put big nails in him, and they put a spear in his side, and blood and water came out. Jesus is dead. It's him. It can't be. It is. How do you know? The women told me. They're not making this up. There's even potentially embarrassing details about Jesus in the text. For example, in Mark chapter 3, it says his own family came to seize him and take him home because they thought he was out of his mind. You may have heard the scholars say, well, the New Testament writers embellish Jesus to be God. Oh, really? Then why is Mark chapter 3 in there? where Jesus is considered nuts by his own family. His own brothers don't believe in him. He's called demon-possessed. You think they made that up? He's called a drunkard. He has his feet wiped with the hair of a prostitute, which easily could have been seen as a sexual advance. And oh, by the way, notice there are two prostitutes in Jesus' bloodline. Who are they? Rahab and Tamar. This is the Messiah's bloodline. Do you think Matthew and Luke, when they got together, they said, you know what? I really think we ought to spice up the Messiah's bloodline a little bit. Let's put a couple of prostitutes in there. What do you say? Rahab, Tamar. No. In fact, there's a lot of shady people in the bloodline. Judah, from where we get the term Jew from, whew, not a good guy. David, a man after God's own heart. Yeah, but he's a liar, adulterer, and a murderer. Gee, I guess there's hope for the rest of us then, huh? Bathsheba's in there. In fact, when Matthew gets to her in the genealogy, he won't mention her name. What does he say instead? Uriah's wife. Ooh. Right? That's a slam. He's telling the truth. Who is Uriah? Husband of Bathsheba, who David had killed so he could have Bathsheba. But it's embarrassing. It's in there. And then Jesus, by the way, is hung on a tree because he's under God's curse. But if you're making up a Messiah to the Jews, you don't hang him on a tree. Why? Because according to Deuteronomy 21:23, anyone who's hung on a tree is under God's curse. What curse was he under? The curse of sin that we put him under. It's true, but you wouldn't invent this. In fact, you notice there are two trees in the garden in Genesis. What are the two? The tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Then you get all the way to the book of the Revelation. What's at the end of the book of Revelation? The tree of life. Do you know there's a tree right in the middle? The tree upon which Jesus was hung. Because we sinned at the tree of the knowledge and good and evil, Jesus had to take all the evil upon himself so we could get back to the tree of life. Now, there's a lot more embarrassing details you can look at in the book. We got to do our final point here. Excruciating deaths is the second reason we know they're telling the truth. These people who were in a position to know whether Jesus had resurrected from the dead or not died excruciating deaths when they could have saved themselves by saying it never happened. By the way, the word excruciating means out of the crucifixion. This is where we get this word from. Now, it's important to recognize that all the writers of the New Testament, with the exception of Luke, all of them were Yahweh-believing Jews. They already thought they were God's chosen people. They didn't think a man could claim to be God. That was blasphemy. And they didn't think a resurrection would occur in the middle of time, only at the end of time. So why would they invent this if it never happened? In fact, what did the New Testament writers have to gain by making up a new religion? What did they get by saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead? Well, they got kicked out of the synagogue, then they got beaten, tortured, and killed. Last time I checked, that was not a list of perks, right? We're going to start a new religion. We are? Yeah. What's it going to get us? First we get kicked out of the synagogue, then beaten, tortured, and killed. Well, sign me up. You know, what a great idea. Why haven't we thought of this earlier? In fact, they had every motive to say the resurrection did not happen, not every motive to say it did. You know, I get this question, maybe you, if you're a Christian, you'll get it too. Are there any non-Christian writers that talk about Jesus and the apostles? Yeah, there are. They're all in chapter 9 of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. But you know what that question really assumes? There's an assumption in there that you really can't trust the New Testament writers because you see, these were the religious biased people. You can only trust the non-religious people because they're more objective. If you think about that for more than 5 seconds, you'll realize how stupid that assumption is. What did these people have to gain? Nothing. They had everything to lose from a temple perspective. My friend J. Warner Wallace, I don't know if you know him. He is a cold case homicide detective who's been on Dateline more than any other cold case detective because he solved murders that are decades old. And Jim is a Christian as well, an apologist. He wrote a book called Cold Case Christianity, where he took all of his detective skills, his cold case skills, and applied them to the greatest homicide of all time, the homicide of Jesus. And here's what he says about murders. He says when he finds a murdered body, he knows that that guy is dead for one of only 3 reasons or a combination of these 3 reasons. There's not 1,000 reasons why that guy's been killed, only 1 or more of these 3. there was either a sex issue, a money issue, or a power issue. That will drive people to murder. That will also drive each one of us to sin. Why? Because sex, money, and power are good things. They're so good that we'll take shortcuts to get them. And so Jim says, if you're going to say all this is made up, that the New Testament writers invented this, you've got to find one or more of those three motivators to say, here's why they did it. Okay, let's go through those motivators. Ladies and gentlemen, did the New Testament writers get real popular with the ladies for saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead? No. Did they get money? No, they weren't 21st century prosperity gospel preachers. Did they get power? No, they got the opposite. They were persecuted. Paul had power when he was persecuting the church. As soon as he becomes a Christian, he gets persecuted. They didn't get sex. They didn't get money. They didn't get power. They're not making it up. Why would they then go die for a known lie? Time out, Frank. If you're going to say that martyrdom proves Christianity, don't you have to say that martyrdom proves Islam? No. Why? Because there's a lot of differences between the Muslim martyrs of today and the New Testament martyrs of New Testament times. The Muslim martyrs of today haven't witnessed anything that tells them that Islam is true. They just have faith. The New Testament martyrs, on the other hand, saw Jesus. They witnessed Jesus. They saw him rise from the dead. They touched him. They ate with him. They verified with their own senses that Jesus had risen from the dead. Many people, or at least some people, will die for a lie they think is the truth. Nobody will die for a lie they know is a lie. And the New Testament writers were in a position to know whether it was a lie or not, and they went to their deaths anyway. You can't get better evidence than that unless you were there yourself. Now, the next thing I'm going to say is going to sound like heresy for those who think that the Bible's inerrant like I do, but it's not. Stay with me, okay? Christianity is not true because a series of documents we put under one binding we call the Bible says it's true. In fact, Christianity would be true if the Bible never existed. You say, how can that be? Because Christianity did not originate with a book. Christianity originated with an event, the resurrection. You wouldn't have books in the first century written by Old Testament believing Jews saying a man claimed to be God and then rose from the dead unless a man claimed to be God and rose from the dead. Do you realize there were thousands of Christians before a line of the New Testament was ever written? Why? Because they didn't read it in a book. They saw it. Yeah. In fact, we could put it this way. The New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. The resurrection created the New Testament writers. You wouldn't have documents written down in the first century by these people saying this had happened unless it really did. All right? So, there's more evidence. We don't have time. There's not only embarrassing stories, excruciating deaths. There's early sources, eyewitness details, embedded confirmation, expected predictions. That's Old Testament prophecy, extra biblical writers, the explosive growth of the church. We don't have time to go through all this. We got to get to your questions. And we've gone through, does truth exist? The answer is? Yeah. Somebody says there's no truth, you're going to say? Is that true? Does God exist? Three arguments. First argument, cosmological. Second, teleological. Third, moral. Are miracles possible? What's the greatest miracle in the Bible? Genesis 1:1. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible. Did Jesus really rise from the dead? Sure seems like he did. There's no motive to invent this, and they paid with their lives and did it with very many embarrassing things. So for more free stuff, if you want this entire PowerPoint presentation and a whole bunch of other free stuff, text the word evidence to this phone number, 855-909-0582. 855-909-0582. And we're going to send it to you in a PDF format. Also, that's our website, crossexamine.org. And we're on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. In fact, we're so into YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, we've actually combined these three into one social media platform. We call it UTwitface. Have you guys signed up for UTwitface yet? It's kind of a Jersey thing. We're on Instagram, too, by the way. Don't forget about the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist podcast, the fact that we're on TV on Wednesday nights. And if you don't do anything else, download the free Cross-Examined app. Free Cross-Examined app, 2 words in the App Store. And it's got a whole bunch of free stuff on there as well. And there's a new book coming out that doesn't come out till May 3rd. My son and I wrote. It's called Hollywood Heroes, How Your Favorite Movies Reveal God. So we go through franchises like Captain America, Iron Man, Harry Potter, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Batman, Wonder Woman. They all point to Jesus. So check that out. Go to HollywoodHeroesBook.com. There's free stuff up there as well, HollywoodHeroesBook.com. All right, now, it's true, so what? So what if Christianity's true? Well, it means someone actually did die for you. Now, when I was in the Navy, I was in naval aviation, so we had to earn golden wings, which were fairly hard to earn. But there's nothing more difficult in any military to earn than a golden trident. That's what the SEALs earn. Very few people that start SEAL training make it through. Maybe 5 or 10%. Those that do make it through wear that trident with pride. It is their identity. When Michael Monsoor was buried in Rosecrans Cemetery just outside of San Diego, just about every Navy SEAL on the West Coast showed up for his funeral. And when they showed up for his funeral, they took off their tridents and they pressed them into his casket. They took their identity and put their identity in the one that died for them, the one that saved them. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to put our identity in our Savior. But our culture says, oh no, put your identity in your political party, or put your identity in your race. There's only one race, the human race. Or put your identity in your sexual orientation, or your boyfriend, or your girlfriend, or your school, or your bank account, or your vocation. Do you realize none of those things are ultimate? Do you realize you can lose all those things? You don't achieve your identity. You receive your identity. If you have to achieve your identity, first of all the pressure's on you. And secondly, there's always somebody out there that can do it better. And thirdly, when you can no longer do what you put your identity in, what, do you no longer have an identity? No, you don't achieve your identity. You receive your identity. John said he's given you the right to become a child of God because he died, took your sins upon himself, has forgiven your sins, and given you his righteousness. So when God sees you, he sees Christ. That's your identity. Not anything that's fleeting here on earth. And he didn't just die, he also rose again to prove it. So, with that said, we're going to questions. And no one likes to ask the first question, so we're moving right on to the second question right here at this mic. And I will put up that number again. There it is, if you didn't get the number. All right, let's start with Jack. Go ahead, Jack.
Hey, Frank. Thank you, Jeff, for coming to LSU.
Yes, my pleasure. Go ahead, sir.
First of all, I just want to say it's been a really great presentation, and I just want to ask, what would you say to a bunch of the people here in the audience that have seen the presentation, they see the evidence, and they're like, wow, like there's a lot of evidence for God, there's a lot of evidence for Christ, for the resurrection. How exactly would you put your identity in Christ? Like, what would, like, you just stop now and you just go home, or what does that actually look like?
You can do it right now by simply saying, I believe that Jesus rose from the dead, that he is my Lord, and you therefore are saved. This is Romans 10:9. If you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that Jesus has risen from the dead, you will be saved. So you got to repent, believe in your heart, and confess with your mouth that Jesus has risen from the dead, that he's your Lord, and you're saved.
Do you
Means
need
you
to
now
go to
have a new
church to do
identity.
that?
You're gonna
Can you do it by yourself? Can you just go home?
Well, you can do it by yourself, but you should then get engaged with other Christians. So it's something that happens, and you're sealed with the Holy Spirit, and that's just the beginning. That's like a kickoff in a football game. That's not the end. That's just a kickoff. Now you're in the game. Now you're actually playing the game. And the game has great rewards in the end. So, yeah, you should accept Christ and then tell somebody about it who's a Christian so you can become more and more like Jesus. That's our goal.
What are some of the rewards, Frank?
What are some of the rewards?
Yeah.
Well, you become...
I know it's not prosperity gospel,
No, it's not that. In fact, you might be killed for saying you're a
well,
Christian, right? You may suffer quite a bit for saying you're a Christian, but the retirement plan is out of this world, let me tell you that. Okay? But you're going to become more like Jesus. You will have contentment. Doesn't mean you're always happy, but you will have a certain joy and contentment because you know what your ultimate destination is. For example, Tim Keller gives this illustration. Let's suppose you were both... there's two people at a job, and it's an awful job. You got to work 80 hours a week. You don't like the people you're working with, and it's mundane work. You hate it. But at the end of the year, one of you is going to be paid $15,000 extra, and the other person is going to be paid $15 million extra, right? Now, the person who's being paid $15,000 is going to be, I can't bear this, right? But the person that's being paid $15 million at the end of it's going to go, I can handle it. No problem, right? I can put up with these people for a year. No problem. I can do it. And this is one of the things that basically Paul says in 2 Corinthians 4, where he says our light and momentary afflictions are achieving for us a greater weight of glory. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what on is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, what is unseen is eternal. You can look past all the problems you have here because you know your ultimate destination is to be with Christ and to be glorified with him and with your loved ones who have trusted Christ as well. So you can go through any difficulty here when you know that's your future.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jack. All right. Yes, sir. Hey, what's your name?
Hi, my name is Hudson.
Austin?
Hudson.
Hudson. Go ahead, Hudson.
And my question is, do you think that there are any differences between the different denominations of Christianity that affect salvation? And if so, what are they?
Yes, because some denominations are they consider themselves Christians, but they're Unitarians. They don't even believe Jesus is the Savior. There are some progressive Christian denominations now that reject the sacrificial atonement, which is the center of Christianity. If Jesus as a perfect lamb didn't come and take our sin upon himself, we're still in our sins, and we're not going to be saved. God, who's infinitely just, can't allow us to go unpunished if they're right. And so there are denominations that reject the essentials of Christianity. So yes, that would be a problem for salvation.
What about denominations that do believe those things? Like the extra details, like a belief in purgatory, for example.
Oh, now you're talking about Catholicism. Well, since I came out of the Catholic Church, I went to Catholic high school because I'm originally from New Jersey, and it's the law you have to be Catholic or Jewish in New Jersey. I don't know if you know that. Okay? So I understand the Catholic faith. In fact, we got this question last night because people will come to me and say, do you think Catholics can be saved? And I always say, I even think some Baptists can be saved, okay? Because it's not where you go to church that saves you. And even the Roman Catholic Church believes this. They talk about separated brethren. There's going to be people in heaven that aren't part of the Catholic Church, okay, according to them. Of course, I believe that's the case anyway because I think salvation is an individual thing. It's not a denominational thing. It's whether or not you've accepted what Christ has come. Do you know that Paul was not part of a denomination? Okay? All the apostles, they weren't part of a denomination. They just trusted in Christ. So, yes, there are... Well, let me put it this way. Can you believe false things and still be saved? I hope so, because if not, none of us are going to make it. Right? But you have to do what I just mentioned earlier. You have to repent of your sins, believe that Jesus died for you and rose again, and if you confess that, you will be saved. That's what Romans 10:9 says. Okay? If you add other things to that, and you're unaware, can you still be saved if you have the core? Yeah, you can still be saved. But why add things that are not true if they're not true? So this is why Paul, by the way, is very adamant with Timothy. Watch your doctrine closely, he says. Get your doctrine right. It's very important. Thankfully, we don't have to be perfect in our doctrine, as I said, because we're fallible human beings. If we had to be perfect, none of us would make it. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hudson. Yes, sir.
Hello.
Yes, sir. What's your name?
What?
What's your name?
Carter.
Carter, go ahead, sir.
So I've had a lot of friends. I'm in high school right now, so a lot of my friends are kind of falling out of the Christian lifestyle, and they're kind of saying that it's not for them. And they've all been like brought up in Christian homes, and I just kind of got into like apologetics very recently, and it's not just a blind faith thing of Christianity. It's like a lot of it is based in evidence. And so my question is, when should apologetics be brought up, like in the life of a child, as to help them, like, in their way to becoming strong Christians?
I would say as early as possible. You ought to be teaching them.
When we're in like Bible study, should we like, I guess, sprinkle it in a little?
Say
like,
what?
Like when we're little kids, like should we like sprinkle it in there, or like when should we? I guess
as soon as they understand cause and effect, and kids naturally understand cause and effect. In fact, Doug Axe, who wrote the book Undeniable, it has to do with the design in biology. The reason the name of his book is called Undeniable, he goes, even kids who were brought up in atheist homes, when they look at a beautiful, say, butterfly or some living thing, they know it's design. They know there's got to be a designer. You need to talk them out of design in order to get them to be an atheist. So it's natural. This is why Paul says in Romans 1 that God's invisible qualities and divine attributes are clearly seen from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. This is called natural theology. Notice when we went through point 2, does God exist? We talked about the cosmological, teleological, and moral arguments. We're not quoting Bible verses. This is called natural theology. You can look at creation and design and the moral law, and you can know that there must be a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause who created and sustains all things without opening any religious writing. So, but you can't just get all the way to Jesus with that. Then you need the scriptures, because the historical data on Jesus comes from that. But you ought to start that very early. We're developing curricula right now for kids as early as second grade. So go to crossexamine.org and check that out there.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Carter. Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
Savannah.
Savannah, go ahead.
So what would you say to an agnostic individual who believes in the existence of a creator God, creator of the universe, believes in life after death, but doesn't believe in divine judgment, doesn't believe that he or she will stand before God one day and be judged?
I would ask them why they think that. How did you come to that conclusion? What do you mean? There's not going to be any judgment? Do you think it's wrong to, first, let's use an extreme example. Someone like Hitler, who never got judged in this life, shouldn't get any judgment in the next life? Do you think that's fair? That's right? Let's see what they say.
So let's say those questions were asked, and they believe that they got their punishment on earth, right?
So I think this person probably in her heart knows that there has to be a judgment. And she's suppressing that because she might want to do her own thing. In fact, let me give you a story that happened when I was down in Dallas a couple of 4 or 5 years ago. We were at the book table after we had done our talk, me and a couple other guys, J. Warner Wallace, and this lady came up to us and said, "Hey, do you got any books on Buddhism?" And I said, "Buddhism? Why Buddhism?" She said, "Well, you know, my friend used to be a Christian, but she's a Buddhist now." And I said, "Look, I don't know your friend at all, but let me just ask you this question. Did your friend recently start doing something that Christians, that the Bible would consider immoral?" And she said, "Well, yeah." I said, "You don't need a book on Buddhism. She's not a Buddhist because she thinks Buddhism's true. She's a Buddhist because she wants to have spirituality without moral accountability."
Yeah.
That's what she wants. Now, there is a moral accountability in some Buddhism. You know, you got the Eightfold Path and all that. But that's all going to be extinguished. You're going to be extinguished at some point in Buddhism. She just doesn't want moral accountability. She wants to say, "I'm spiritual," but she doesn't want to have to say, "Nobody's the boss of me. I get to do what I want."
Right.
That's my New York accent. Anyway, so I think that quite often is the reason. And maybe you ought to ask her, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? If Jesus really was not only the Savior, but also a judge, would you bow your knee? I mean, why did Jesus have to come if there's no judgment? What are we saved from if there's no judgment? What's the point?
Right.
There isn't. So I would just ask some questions. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you, Savannah. Yes, sir.
How are you doing today? Thank you so much. Carter basically asked the questions, but I didn't stand up here for 15 minutes, waiting. So I'm going to ask the same question again.
Okay, go ahead.
So, foundationally, I have 3 kids of my own. One's 12, 9, and the other one's 4. Foundationally, where should I start? We've done whole case Christianity for kids, right? We've done these struggles, books for kids. Where should I start with them when it comes down to apologetics? Foundationally, where did you start with your kids?
Well, that was years ago. My kids are in their 30s.
Correct.
So I taught them personally, and we homeschooled the kids up to 8th grade, then they went to high school. We've just developed a new curriculum called God is Real. Or is God real, question mark, for 2nd to 5th graders. So check our website there. That would be something that would be helpful to that young an age. And we're, in the fall, coming out with one for 6th to 8th graders. And then, of course, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist is good for junior high and above.
Right. So with that...
And anything by Summit, too. Check out summit.org.
Yeah, okay. So with that, you say curriculum. Will you be writing a book as like J. Warren Wells has done? Just for kids?
This is a curriculum that can take kids through the material.
Okay.
Not just a book.
Right.
Yeah.
So will you write one eventually?
That's what we're working on right now.
All right,
Yeah.
thank you, I appreciate it.
All right, thank you. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Hey, Dr. Turek, Cody. Hope that doesn't give you PTSD. I'll be easy on you today.
The what?
I said, my name's Cody. I hope that doesn't give you
Oh,
PTSD.
Cody, the old yes, Cody from Nebraska, University of Nebraska. Sorry, it's hard for me to hear up here because the
Yeah.
speakers are going the other way, but go ahead, Cody.
All right. If loss is universal between believers and non-believers, then in the midst of loss, how do you navigate the thoughts of feeling you have to forgive God for taking something away from you when theologically God can do no wrong?
All right, you're going to have to say that again slowly.
All right. So if loss is universal between believers and non-believers, then in the midst of loss, how do you navigate the thoughts of feeling you have to forgive God for taking something away from you when theologically God can do no wrong?
Question, why do you ask that, Cody?
In a sense, to, like when doubt with loss, to doubt forward into believing God's plan.
You're trying to figure out how to deal with it, right?
Correct.
Yeah. This is a hard question, and there's 2 answers. There's the pastoral answer and the philosophical answer. You need the pastoral answer, and I'm not a pastor. The philosophical answer is, well, it may be part of the pastoral answer, is you go to the Psalms. Because you can find every emotion in the Psalms, from people that have lost loved ones, to people that have been through incredible difficulty, to people who are wondering, God, where are you? I haven't even done anything wrong, and this is happening to me. And I think the Psalms are very cathartic if you read them and meditate on them and pray them. You know, most of the Bible is God talking to us. The Psalms are us talking to God. All right? So I think that's really important. I think, secondly, the more philosophical answer here is that although we don't know why certain bad things happen, we know why we don't know why. We're locked inside of time. God can see the end from the beginning. And just because something happens and we go, I can't see any good coming from that, does that mean no good can be coming from that? No, because there's a ripple effect, right? Every event that occurs ripples forward to affect trillions of other events. In fact, if you were to think about your own life here tonight, how many ripples had to occur for you to even be in existence, right? Let's just take from a genetic standpoint. Your parents had to meet, their parents had to meet, their parents had to meet, you get the idea, right? There's trillions of ripples going on all the time, and we can't trace them all. So when we see something that's inexplicable, we can say, I'm going to trust God even though I can't see the end from the beginning because I know He's trustworthy. Does that make sense? All right. Thank you, Cody. Yep. Yes, sir. What's your
How's it
name?
going? I had a question about the moral argument.
Yeah.
So this is what I wrote. How does God's view of what's best for us solve the problem of objective morality? If we compare what is good and bad according to the nature of an infinitely loving God, then what makes God's loving nature inherently good? If it's God himself who defines his nature as good, then on what basis? Are we not just dealing with the same problem of trying to understand why is it good to be good and never truly having an objective starting place when it comes to morality?
Yeah, good question. I think the reason that we say God is good is because what all philosophers and theologians mean by God is the ultimate good, whatever that is. Okay? So when we say God, probably what we ought to do is take the word God just out of our vocabulary for a minute, because we all have maybe different conceptions of what we mean by God. Think about it this way. Who is the source and sustainer of all things? Think about that. Who is the source and sustainer of all things? Where did all this originated and how is it being sustained? Who's doing that? Whatever that is, whoever that is, that's what we mean by God. And the buck has to stop somewhere. It stops at the nature of this source and sustainer of all things. So when we say God is good, good is a positive quality. As I mentioned earlier, evil is a negative quality. Evil can't exist without good. Good can exist without evil, but evil can't exist without good. So ultimate reality, the source and sustainer of all things, can't be by definition evil, because evil requires good to exist. So the yin and the yang don't work.
So basically we're just defining the ultimate source as what is good?
We're saying that whatever good is, that's what we mean by God. God is the standard of good. Now, how would we know about this God? He can reveal himself in a couple of ways. He can reveal himself through his creation, or he can reveal himself by inspiring people to write more details about him. And I think he's done both. He tells us about himself through his creation. We can see his qualities through his creation and also our conscience. And he gives us more details through written revelation. That's how we know who God is. And the way we can be affirmed that the God who created all things is the same God of the written revelation is that the written revelation lines up with what we know about the natural revelation, and God intervenes in miraculous ways to confirm that the people who are speaking for him are truly speaking for him. So God does three things. He creates, he sustains, and he intervenes through miracles on occasion.
I get what you're saying about how we can learn what, like Yahweh specifically has in store for us and what he thinks is good.
Right.
But I'm failing to understand what makes his opinion objective.
Well, it's not his opinion, it's his nature. Okay. See, there has to be a standard that's immovable, that is what we call good, true, right, just. All those attributes have to be somewhere, and even Plato recognized this. He put them in forms independent of God. We're saying those forms, if you want to call them forms, are God's nature. All right?
Thank you.
Good question. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Before I ask you a question, I'd just like to say you talk very fast.
I'm from New Jersey. You cannot listen in Southern. All right? You tried to listen in Southern. You can't do that. What's your name?
David.
David, go ahead, sir.
So, what do you define as nature?
Nature? Well, it depends on what you're talking about. A nature, for like a human nature, there's certain qualities of a human being that we would say comprise his or her nature. For example, they're rational beings, right? We're rational. We can talk to one another and communicate with one another. We're moral beings. We can make choices that are either good or bad. That's part of a human nature. Those are essences of the human nature. There may be accidents of human nature, like an accident might be that I have gray eyes and you have green eyes or whatever. I have blonde hair and you have reddish hair, whatever. Those are accidents, but there are essences of human nature like rationality and morality, for example.
I guess I'm referring to the nature, like when we refer to the earth and its matter, I suppose. I don't really know what I'm asking.
That's okay. Is there a nature to the earth, are you saying, or something? Or what do you mean?
I guess when we refer to nature, like we're talking...
you're talking about natural laws. Is that what you mean?
Explain.
Like you're talking about gravity and the strong and weak nuclear forces and electromagnetism, the 4 natural forces? Is that what you mean?
Like when we refer to... I'm really not sure.
All right, well, that's okay. We can talk more later, David. Thanks. Yes, sir.
It's nice to meet you.
What's your name?
Jude.
Jude, go ahead, sir.
Why did God create anything?
Why did God create what?
Anything.
That's the hardest question to answer. He didn't have to, right? He was perfectly content in the Trinity. He had love in the Trinity. He had a lover, a loved one, and a spirit of love. He didn't have to create. It says in the scriptures he created for his glory. What does that mean? So he could create creatures that would know of him and be able to enjoy him forever. The Westminster Confession says the purpose of our existence is to know God and to enjoy him forever. So he didn't have to, but as a loving being, he chose to create to give creatures the ability to enjoy him forever, but he didn't have to. No, because it's loving. He doesn't need us. We need him, right? This is why when people say, oh, what's God, some cosmic ego? He needs us to worship him. No, he doesn't. He doesn't need us to worship him. We need to worship him for our benefit. You see, God knows what's best for us because we are going to worship something. We're either going to worship God or some other aspect of creation. There's only 2 things you can worship, either the Creator or some aspect of creation. And so we're going to put maybe sex, money, or power as top priorities in our lives rather than God. And he knows that's not going to work for us long term. So he says, if you want to have contentment and joy, put me at the top and all these other things will be given to you. Not that we're all going to get sex, money, and power, but you're going to get what you need to live a fulfilled life. All right, thanks. Good question, Jude. Yes, sir.
Hi, Dr. Tzwer. My name is Dylan.
Dylan. From New York? New York Yankees.
Yes, sir. My family's from New York.
All right,
so I'm
good.
a big Yankees fan. I'm a huge admirer of your work. My question is, why do we refer to some Bible characters as their original name, such as Jacob versus Abraham? We refer to him as his, I guess, changed name. Jacob's name was changed to Israel. Abram's name was changed to Abraham.
Well, I know God renamed Abram to Abraham. Paul became, or was Saul and became Paul. Why do we refer to them that way? Well, maybe because God said, here's his new name. I don't know. I would just assume we're going with what God said. That makes sense to me. But do you have some other angle on this?
Well, I guess, why do we say the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel?
Well, that might be too confusing, because then we're confusing maybe Israel with the nation of Israel, perhaps. I don't know, but we do say Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You're right. I say that so I can remember the order, right? Because I get all those people mixed up back there sometimes. Like, who came first? Was it Abraham? I know Abraham came first, but who came after him? So I got to remember Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Dylan. Yes, ma'am. How you doing?
Hey, thank you so much for speaking. I wanted to know, what is the most difficult argument you have ever heard for atheism, and how did you respond?
Oh, great question. I think the most difficult argument to answer is, well, let me put it this way. I don't think questions are hard to answer. They're just hard to answer in 2 minutes, right? I mean, if we had a semester, we could go through all the possibilities of why does God allow certain evils, right? I just gave a brief answer a few minutes ago, the ripple effect, right? But, you know, you could talk about that for a semester. So I think the biggest problem, or the hardest question to answer in a short period of time is why did God allow this evil or that evil, and to give a satisfactory answer to that, because a lot of times we don't know why, but we know why we don't know why. And it's more of an emotional issue than an intellectual issue. So those are the harder ones to answer in a short period of time. Other hard ones are questions that are brought up about certain biblical passages that you don't always have time to exegete, meaning interpret properly in context in 2 minutes, right? You got to go back and look at the passage again, see what was going on. And so you need more time than that. Those are the hardest ones to answer. But with regard to atheism, I do not think atheists have arguments for atheism. What they have are complaints about the way God's running the universe. That's really what atheism is all about. I don't like the way God is allowing this evil. I don't like that God puts certain restrictions on who I have sex with. I don't like the way God is running this or running that. Those are all complaints about the way God's running the universe. They're not arguments against God. All right, thank you. Yes, sir. What's your name?
John Paulo.
John Paulo. Go ahead, sir.
All right. My question is, so you would agree that when we die, we either go to heaven and hell and we don't come back. Heaven or hell and we don't come back. So
well, right now we're going to go be with Christ. Ultimate heaven hasn't been created yet. But yeah.
So where did Lazarus go when he was dead?
Well, the question is we don't know. That's be the first question I'd ask him. That's what I'd ask him. What was it like? What happened? I don't know. I don't know where he went. Would you go to Abraham's bosom and just wait, just like the which Lazarus you're talking about? You're talking about
like the Lazarus that Jesus was like, come out, Lazarus.
Dead, come out, right? Yeah. Was he in Abraham's bosom like the other Lazarus in Luke 16 was in Abraham's bosom, and the rich man was in hell or Hades? So we don't know. It doesn't really say. We're not exactly sure. He could have been in just in an intermediate state. Like people, I know it's going to sound weird, but when your loved one dies now, they don't go to heaven. Okay, they go to be with Christ, because technically the ultimate heaven hasn't been created yet. That's going to be a remade heaven and earth. And ultimate heaven is going to be a physical place where we have our physical bodies resurrected that don't break down, right? They're imperishable. So there's some sort of intermediate state. And we don't have a lot of information about that.
Also, when approaching a stranger in a evangelical, like if I came up to this guy and was like, he was a stranger, I want to talk to him about Jesus, what's your go-to question to start out an apologetic conversation?
Where are you from? What do you do? I just ask, I try and learn what the other person, where they're coming from. What's your story? I just want to learn about them before I jump into a heavier conversation about whether God exists or, you know, I want to see where they are. And by the way, those 4 questions, truth, God, miracles, New Testament, if you're already somebody believing in God, right, then you can jump ahead to miracles or New Testament. So I don't really have a go-to question. It's kind of, I just want to see where the person's coming from. For me, I have a different, I have something maybe that I can do that maybe you can't. When people say, what do you do? Well, I wrote a book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, right? And then I see their reaction. If they're interested, then I can talk more. If they totally shut down and go, oh, this guy's crazy, right? Then I know it doesn't matter what I say, okay? So you might be able to use something like that. You know, I'm a student and I'm studying religious studies, or I'm studying Christianity, and see what people say, right? If they're open, maybe you can go a little bit further. What do you believe? What do you think about? Do you think Jesus rose from the dead? Do you think God exists? You know, just ask questions like that.
All right, thank you.
All right, thanks, John Paulo. Yes, hi, what's your name?
Hey, Frank, I'm Danny.
Say again?
Danny.
Dan?
Danny.
Danny, go ahead.
Yeah. And just for warning, I suppress the truth and unrighteousness. I'm an atheist, so bear with me. I have a question about, earlier you said that good and evil were somewhat codependent, that in order to have a concept of good, you also had to have a concept of evil, recognize.
What evil was, you had to know what good was. You could know good without evil, but you can't know evil without good.
All right. Okay.
Right.
So having established that, when I look at or ponder your design argument, if you think God is the creator of all things, that means everything is created everything is designed. So what are you using to compare a designed thing versus an undesigned thing to recognize that something like DNA is actually designed?
Yeah, because in every other instance we see genetic code, we know it always comes from a mind. So for example, if you're walking along the beach and you see in the sand, John loves Mary, you don't say, well, the crabs did that, right? Or the waves lapped up against the sand and made John loves Mary in the sand. We know how that had to be an intelligent being, right? This is why when we train our our satellites out into the atmosphere, we're looking for certain patterns in the radio waves. This is called 𝗧𝗜𝗚𝗘𝗏𝗧𝗏, search for extraterrestrial intelligence. If we get a certain pattern, we'll know there's intelligent life out there, because natural laws themselves don't create the kind of what is known as specified complexity that a message is. So we know that messages always come from minds, and when we see in a living thing a message that's 3.5 billion letters long in every one of your 100 trillion cells, we go, intelligence.
But I think the weight of my question, I mean, do you think there's anything that hasn't been designed? Anything?
You mean anything in the space-time continuum?
Right? Anything in the universe. The cosmos was created by God, so it follows that everything in the cosmos was created by God and designed. So there's nothing that you compare to say that something's designed versus is undesigned.
Well, no, because you know that nature by itself will take things to disorder. Like, for example, nature will take a building like this and turn it into a pile of bricks, but nature will never take a pile of bricks and turn it into a building. What did God create? What?
Did God create all natural forces, natural laws, natural...
Yes, I think God created the natural forces and sustains them, yes.
Okay, so those are created things, they're designed things, so that you can't use that as a model for an undesigned thing.
Well, I think the fact that natural laws are so precise and consistent and are fine-tuned, that is more evidence of a divine being. But the fact that those natural laws don't create specified complexity, it would require more intelligence to come in and create a specified complex thing like a cell.
Sorry, I may have not understood your answer. Is there anything that you think that exists today in the cosmos that's not created or anything that's undesigned?
Well, it depends on what you mean by that. There are things...
Anything in the cosmos. Anything. Atoms.
I'm trying to understand the direction of your question here, because if we go outside right now and we see dirt out there...
God created that.
Well, God created the planet, but the dirt may be in such a configuration that the natural laws working on it have made it just be in a random way. But if we went out there and the dirt was pressed into bricks and there was a wall built around the tree, we'd go, okay, that dirt has had intelligence put on it in order to create this wall. So we can still tell design, even though if everything is designed, we can still tell design from an illustration like this, because we could see dirt left to itself doesn't create a wall, but dirt put into brick form can create a wall if you put intelligence on it.
I think the way I'm interpreting your question is that we can tell when humans interact with the world, but in terms of God interacting with the world, there's no way to tell, because everything serves as God's creation.
Yes, everything is God's creation, but we can see where, in fact, what you can do is you can take the natural laws, which atheists don't explain. In fact, who was it? Stop me. Paul Davies from Arizona State University, an agnostic. In 2006, wrote an editorial in the New York Times, said, taking science on faith. And basically, we're saying, where do the laws of nature come from? And everybody who was an atheist or an agnostic wrote to him and say, we don't ask questions like that. Stop asking questions like that, because the natural laws that drive and govern the universe seem to have a designer behind them. And so we agree there's a designer behind them, except the atheists don't want to ask that question. Why do the natural laws exist? But the natural laws do the same thing over and over again. They don't create specified complexity, just like they don't create our illustration of a wall around a tree out here. So we can tell design, even if everything is ultimately at its foundation design.
I was sort of granting that everything was designed, but thanks for your time.
Okay. Thank you, Danny. Appreciate it. Yes, how you doing? What's your name?
Nicola, how are you doing?
Nikolai, good.
So I have two questions, so I just want to keep it quick. Should infertile people be allowed to legally marry?
Should infertile people be allowed to illegally marry? Why not?
Well, if, as you say, the morality of relations in the government, so like the whole reason the government is in marriage is to make sure that we continue to produce children and therefore produce society. If the whole basis is the ability to produce children, then it would seem that people who can't produce children biologically should not be allowed to marry. And
exception rather than the rule, okay? And the reason that marriage has been between a man and a woman from all eternity, as long as civilization has been around, is to perpetuate and stabilize society. And the reason that we have a society and a civilization is because a man and a woman come together and they procreate and they nurture the next generation. When that breaks down, civilization breaks down, as we've been seeing in this country for the past 40 or 50 years. Okay? Now, just because some people who are men and women, say older people or infertile people, don't procreate, when they get married, they're still illustrating to the rest of society that a man-woman relationship is still a relationship that models what needs to be modeled to the rest of the society. And maybe one or the other of this infertile couple is the true infertile one. If that broke up, and say this man then goes out and he is the fertile one and he engages in extramarital sex with somebody else, then he's creating illegitimate children, which is going to be a problem for the children and for society generally. The best thing that he could do would be to stay in the relationship with his wife. So the marriage is not just to procreate, it's also to model to the rest of society, because the law is a great teacher that this is the way society and civilization is actually established.
I mean, I would question whether or not you could say society is heterosexual when the ancient Greeks and Romans were very famous for their enthusiasm towards homosexual relations. But on to my second question.
Well, hang on, Nikolai, that's true. Never said that same-sex relationships were the equivalent of opposite-sex relationships, nor did they ever say that same-sex relationships constituted marriage, because they knew that civilization could only exist when a man and a woman come together. Now, you're right, they did engage in activities that were not biblical, and that's why when Paul writes the book of 1 Corinthians, he's really going against the nature of society at that point. He lived in an area of prostitution where any Roman man could have sex with anyone at any time, and the wife couldn't. In fact, let me just say one thing about this, because I think it's an interesting observation. And a lot of you are going to hate me, but I'm just going to tell you what I think is the truth. Do you know that modern feminism wants women to act more like men sexually, whereas biblical Christianity wants men to act more like women sexually? In other words, biblical Christianity wants men to be monogamous, whereas modern feminism wants women to be non-monogamous like men. That's a disaster for civilization.
So my second question, where you say that morality is based in God, there's vast evidence of people creating civilizations like the Native Americans who, for tens of thousands of years, have never came across the Christian God, but yet they very clearly have evidence of like morality and functioning society. And I just want to hear what your response is to that.
It's a good question, Nikolai. Christians do not believe that you even need to know the Bible to know right and wrong. In the details you do, but not in the big picture. In fact, if you needed the Bible to know right from wrong, the entire generation of Noah was judged unjustly because they didn't have a Bible. Adam and Eve didn't have a Bible. Abraham didn't have a Bible. You don't need the Bible to know basic right and wrong because it's written on your heart. In fact, this is one of the arguments that Paul makes in Romans chapter 2, that the Gentiles are not of the law written on their hearts. This is why C.S. Lewis could write a book like Mere Christianity and Abolition of Man, especially Abolition of Man, where he says every major culture has agreed on the essentials of morality. They may disagree over the peripherals, but in the core of it, they agree because it's written on their hearts.
So would you say that humans inherently understand morality?
We inherently understand on the big issues, like for example, as soon as you're old enough to know what murder is, you know that murder's wrong. As soon as you're old enough to know what theft is, you know theft is wrong. That doesn't mean you always behave in accord with that moral precept, but you know it. You might suppress it and go your own way. I might do that. We all do that on occasion, but we know it.
I guess why I ask this, because if Native Americans and like all other humans, we inherently understand what is right from wrong, then it seems like morality is not based in the Christian God, but instead whatever the basis for humanity is, which you can very well say is the Christian God. The totality of saying that morality comes only from God seems to be a little insufficient.
Well, where else would morality come from if it didn't come from God?
Well, if it comes inherently from humans, it could come from humanity itself.
But which human? Mother Teresa or Hitler?
Humanity is like an entire society. We don't need rules for one person, so why should one person make one rule?
Well, let me ask you a question. Let's suppose Hitler won World War II and convinced everybody that murdering Jews, homosexuals, and gypsies was morally right. Would it be morally right?
No.
Okay, so society can't determine right and wrong. Society can only discover what's right and wrong. Otherwise, it's just your society against Hitler's society.
I don't see how that answers the question of morality being based off of God, but I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, I'm simply saying majority vote doesn't determine what right and wrong is.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I'm not saying that either. I'm saying that like morality to be based in God is to like ignore basic facts that not everyone can come across God, and but everyone has morality.
Well, again, you don't need to know it's the Christian God, because before Christ ever came to earth, people knew basic right and wrong. The source is the Christian God, even though the Christian God hadn't revealed himself to the fullest extent prior to him coming. So the morality is put on our hearts by God before he has completely revealed himself in the scriptures.
But if we have the inherent morality, do we need God?
Yes, because you wouldn't have it unless God existed. Just like you can read a book and not know who the author is, you wouldn't have a book unless there was an author. Right?
Thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you, Nikolai. Good question.
Oh, hey, Doc. My name's Sam Karambad, and I just wanted to say thank you for the message tonight. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I was actually coming up with a question in regards to a conversation I had.
Wait, you guys can't stay for 4 hours? Oh. Gee.
All right, I won't take offense. It's fine.
All right, go ahead, Sam.
So anyway, I just had a quick question in regards to a conversation I had with a family member of mine a couple weeks back. He's sort of atheist, borderline agnostic, kind of admits there might be a God. But his big point that he was trying to throw my way was that how can I worship a God that allows so much suffering and allows, pain and murder and all this stuff in the world? And I tried to explain to him a little bit about how, God sent his son Christ to die for us, and that's like the ultimate gift. And he was like, well, why did Jesus have to die? Why couldn't he just allow it? And I was honestly curious if you had any other perspectives, thoughts, ideas, or things I could take back and kind of converse with him later on.
Whenever there is a sin, there's always a loss. Say I steal from you and take your money and you just forgive me, right? Either if you forgive me, you have to absorb that loss, right? Or you might say, hey, you need to give that money back so you don't absorb the loss. But somebody has to pay something when there is a problem. Or let's say I borrow your car and I crack it up. If you want to have your car fixed, you're going to have to absorb that loss and get it fixed. You're going to have to say, Frank, you need to pay for it. In other words, when there's something that goes wrong, somebody has to pay. This is just the way life is. And God, since he's infinitely just, can't allow injustice to go unpunished. Otherwise, he wouldn't be infinitely just. So that's why Jesus had to come and take our sin upon himself. And this is explained in Romans 3:26, where Jesus says, or Paul says, that he is the just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. That God remains just because he punishes sin, but he also justifies sinners because he takes our punishment on himself. All right. Thank you, Sam. Thank you. All right. We'll finish right after Jonah.
Thank you for coming out to talk tonight.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Okay, so on the topic of denominations, last night you talked about Catholicism and Protestantism having the same agreement on the essentials of the gospel. So in the Catholic sense, faith plus works, the sacraments, believing that helps obtain and sustain salvation, and the Protestant idea of faith alone by the power of God.
I think the Protestant view is correct, and I think what's going on in Catholicism is they are compressing or conflating justification and sanctification. That's what they're doing. It's, justification happens instantly when you believe. You're saved. You repent, you believe, you're saved. Sanctification is the process of becoming more and more like Christ, and that's a long-term process over your life. You could put it this way. It took 1 day to get Israel out of Egypt. That's justification. It took 40 years to get Egypt out of Israel. That's sanctification. That takes a long process. And I think the difference between Protestants and Roman Catholics is Protestants are saying justification happens instantly, it's done. Catholics are saying, no, it's part of the sanctification process. That's why you got to get these sacraments and you got to go through all this to ultimately get there.
So in the sense of, I'm not going to limit it to just Catholics, but someone who would believe faith plus works of some sort of their own would save them, would you say that constitutes saving faith for that person?
As long as grace is in there, as long as they believe they are saved by grace, they can't be saved apart from Christ's saving work, right? They can't. Now, I'd be worried about adding that to it because I know how people are saved. But if they understand that Christ's salvation or Christ's work is really what saves them, then they're saved. If they're adding other things to that, if they're confused about theology in that regard, but they know that Christ is their Savior, I think they're still saved, right? Obviously, you don't need to do good works to be saved. The thief on the cross didn't do it. The thief on the cross wasn't part of a denomination. He never went to a club, never went to a meeting, never read a Bible, never was baptized, never got any of the sacraments, and yet he's in paradise. How can that be? Because he's saved by the grace that Christ has provided by being punished in his place. So I would say don't add to that. But if you do, can you still be saved? I hope so. Seems so.
Thank you.
All right. Yes, sir.
Hey, Doc. My name is Christian.
Christian, go ahead.
Team Jesus.
Yes, sir.
I just got a text from a friend, and he had a question, so I just wanted to ask you.
Asking for a friend.
Yeah, this is hypothetical, not my question. He says he has so many friends that come to spirituality and God or their conception of him through psychedelics, and he struggles to explain to them how it's inherently against the Christian worldview. And so I guess my question is, like, what are the dangers of psychedelics, and how, if they were revealing the spiritual realm to people, how are they not good?
How do we know that the proper spiritual realm is being revealed? Because there's two spiritual realms. And secondly, Paul says, and the scriptures in general talk about the sin of drunkenness. Now, they didn't have the sense of the kind of psychedelics we're talking about now, but the effect is the same, drunkenness. This is not something we want to do. There's a difference between, say, drinking wine as a complement to a meal and drinking alcohol to get drunk or taking psychedelics to get inebriated somehow. That is not something that the scriptures would support. So I would say absolutely not, because you are losing your faculties and opening yourself up to the demonic. So,
thank you.
No.
Also, just quick thing. So you explained, you compared the grains of sand times 100,000 to, I I guess, just the distance between the stars. I just wanted to ask, who counted those grains of sand?
Well, actually, the researchers at the University of Hawaii came up with that estimate, that the number of stars in the universe are about equivalent to the number of grains of sand on all the beaches on all the Earth times 100,000. 100,000 Earths. How did they do that? I don't know. Maybe they took a cup of sand and counted it out and did some rough calculations to figure out how much sand is on all the beaches on all the Earth and went, this is it. There you go. That's right. You got to. They got a lot of sand around them, right? All right, Jonah, here he is, ladies and gentlemen. He's the one that organized this, so give him a hand there. Yeah, I know. Gee, it's been an hour. All right, thanks, folks. Thanks for being here.